Hello everyone, Omni-sensei here with What If I Was Reborn in JJK and Maki is My Lover? Harem, Part 5. If you enjoy this content, smash the like button. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to check out the original story linked in the description.
"I'll text you at noon," he replied smoothly. "I'll block your number," she shot back, retreating further into the carriage to hide from the platform. The automated departure chime echoed over the speakers. The doors began to slide shut. Through the narrowing gap, he watched her refuse to look directly at him, arms crossed tightly like a shield. But just before the doors sealed, he caught the faint, undeniable trace of a smile pulling at the corner of her lips. The train hissed, vibrating as it slid away. He stood in the rush of displaced air, watching the silver cars accelerate until the tunnel swallowed them. The station noise rushed back in, filling the empty space. His smile faded. Turning his back to the tracks, his expression shifted into a cold, focused calm as he joined the heavy flow of the crowd heading for the exit. Stepping out of the heavy shadows of Shinagawa Station, the morning sun hit his face. He kept his expression perfectly neutral, navigating the sea of business suits and school uniforms. With Mai safely out of the city and Maki already isolated in Hokkaido, the board was as clear as it was going to get. Now it was just about preparing his arsenal. As he walked, a translucent, glowing blue panel snapped into existence in his vision, hovering effortlessly in the air a few feet ahead. Unseen by the hundreds of people brushing past, the interface opened his newly expanded system point exchange. He mentally selected his newest acquisition, Innate Technique, Construction. The menu expanded, revealing the upgrade tree. Right at the top, glowing in premium gold text, was the primary option. Core Technique Evolution. Description. ? Cost. 250,000 system points. A dry scoff escaped him. He shook his head, staring blankly at the floating golden zeros. "Just 250,000, he muttered. "Let me just check my pockets for some spare change. Or better yet, go find another special grade volcano to throw myself into." He swiped the massive price tag away. Scrolling down, a secondary option caught his eye. Operational efficiency. Tapping it brought up a 5-tier star rating. Efficiency rating. Construction. Current status. 1 star. 1 star. Critical energy bleed. The breakdown was brutal. Mai's baseline technique was a massive gas guzzler. It burned through a ridiculous amount of cursed energy just to pull a single bullet from thin air. It worked, but it was completely unoptimized. Fixing it, though, was straightforward. Hitting 5-star efficiency would cut the energy cost by 80%. It would fundamentally turn an exhausting one-shot parlor trick into a sustainable, rapid-fire weapon. Since his new inventory capped his stored energy at 50,000 units, making every drop count was exactly what he needed. But the pricing was steep. Upgrade costs. Efficiency. Upgrade to 2-star, 10,000 points. Upgrade to 3-star, 20,000 points. Upgrade to 4-star, 40,000 points. Upgrade to 5-star, 80,000 points. Turning onto a quieter side street, he did the math in his head. The cost doubled with every tier. Maxing it out from the bottom meant dropping a total of 150,000 points. He swiped a hand through the empty air, shattering the blue interface into harmless pixels. There was no point agonizing over currency he didn't have. 150,000 points was a luxury. For now, the technique would just have to sit untouched in his back pocket. The walk to the station dissolved into a blur of concrete and exhaust fumes. Within minutes, he grabbed a ticket for the local line, leaving the chaotic crush of Shibuya behind on the platform. Leaning against the cool glass of the train window, he let the rhythmic clatter of the tracks wash over him. Tokyo sped by in flashes of gray under an overcast sky. Deep in his chest, the slow, steady siphon of his cursed energy hummed. It didn't hurt, but the hollow, phantom sensation of the was impossible to ignore. By the time the train doors slid open on the city's outskirts, the afternoon sun was already dipping low. The hike up the winding, forested stone steps to the campus was usually a chore. Today, it was just a quiet stretch to clear his head. Dry autumn leaves scraped across the completely empty cobblestone courtyard. He pushed open the heavy metal doors of the underground clinic. The sharp scent of antiseptic immediately hit him, cut perfectly by the rich aroma of dark roast coffee. Shoko Yeri slouched at her stainless steel desk, a lit cigarette pinched loosely between her fingers. In the corner, the high-end espresso machine he had bribed her with weeks ago hummed quietly. She didn't even look up from her autopsy report when the door clicked shut. If you broke another bone, you're fixing it yourself. Nothing broken, he said, pulling up a rolling stool and taking a seat across from her. Just killing time. Taking a slow drag from her cigarette, Shoko finally looked up. The dark shadows under her eyes looked heavier than usual. You look like you haven't slept in a week. Don't tell me Satoru actually gave you homework. Can't a guy just come down here to hang out? He leaned back on the stool, a faint smile breaking through the exhaustion. She blew a thin stream of gray smoke toward the ceiling. Most normal teenagers prefer arcades or coffee shops, not an active underground morgue. But sure, make yourself at home. The corpses don't talk much anyway. The hum of the espresso machine filled the quiet space. Dropping the smile, the room settled into a comfortable, grounded silence. Tapping her ash into a small glass tray, she murmured, "Seriously though, if I could fake my own death and bypass the higher-ups, I'd be on a one-way flight to Okinawa by tomorrow morning. Just me, a private beach, and an endless supply of high-grade awamori." A quiet chuckle escaped him. Resting his elbows on his knees, he tilted his head. "Okinawa, huh? Not really your usual dark and brooding aesthetic. I figured you'd prefer a cabin in the mountains. Less sun, more isolation. Sun's fine if the booze is cheap." She took a slow drag of her cigarette. "No curses. No old men. No gojo." He smiled, knowing exactly who she meant. "Sounds like paradise." "It is." She let her eyes flutter shut in momentary bliss. A completely unreachable, entirely fictional paradise. The air pressure in the cramped office violently snapped. Did I hear someone talking about a vacation without me? Before the spatial distortion could even settle, Satoru Gojo materialized directly in the center of the room. Unbothered by the sudden shift in gravity, he stood tall, the signature black blindfold secured firmly over his eyes. Brightly colored shopping bags balanced precariously in his arms. "Satoru." Shoko didn't even blink. Her voice fell completely flat. "I am holding a scalpel under this desk. Give me one good reason not to throw it at your throat. Because I come bearing gifts." He beamed, hoisting the bags like trophies before dropping them onto the only clean corner of the autopsy desk. "I just took a quick detour to Sendai. Figured my two favorite gloomy people could use a sugar rush." He started yanking items out, listing them off with excessive enthusiasm. 3 boxes of kikufukumachi, zunda, matcha, and raw cream, a massive strawberry crepe, wrapped in pink paper and practically overflowing with whipped cream, 2 iced lattes, both loaded with an ungodly amount of caramel syrup. "You went to Sendai." He raised an eyebrow at the pile. "Just now." "Yep." The line for the machi was terrible, though. "Nearly waited 5 whole minutes," Gojo complained, leaning his lanky frame against the stainless steel. He tossed one of the sweating plastic cups across the room. Catching it effortlessly, the ice rattled inside. "Thanks." A quick push popped the straw through the lid. Shoko glared at the bright boxes invading her workspace. I don't eat sweets, Satoru. You know this. They ruin the taste of my tobacco. Your loss. More for me. Humming happily, Gojo tore the pink paper off the crepe. He took a massive bite, chewing thoughtfully. Then he turned his head. The casual, goofy aura didn't vanish, but the atmosphere immediately tightened. For a long, silent moment, Gojo just chewed. His shoulders stayed relaxed, but his head tilted a fraction of an inch. Say, Gojo mumbled around a mouthful of whipped cream. He swallowed. A slow, knowing smirk crept onto his face. Did you lose something recently? A calm sip of the caramel latte bought a second of time. Keeping his heartbeat perfectly steady and his posture relaxed, he met the blindfolded gaze. Not that I'm aware of. Why? Just an observation, Gojo hummed, taking a step closer. He leaned in, tapping a long, bandaged finger through the air right at his chest. Your cursed energy. It was already microscopic, sure, but right now, it's draining, leaking out like a bathtub with the plug pulled. Shoko froze, her cigarette hovering halfway to her mouth. Her medical instincts flared, eyes darting sharply across the desk. Your bleeding energy? Ren lowered the plastic cup. He wiped a drop of caramel from his chin and looked at Gojo. Leaking? Ren asked. He leaned back on the stool. Am I dying? Or is this just a fun fact? Shoko crushed her cigarette into the glass tray. She grabbed a small medical penlight from her desk. Sit still, she said, stepping over to him. Gojo laughed around a mouthful of crepe. You're not dying, but your energy is definitely circling the drain. It's like watching a really slow, boring, leaky faucet. Ren let Shoko tilt his chin up. The bright light flashed across his eyes. I woke up feeling a little hollow today, he said casually. Figured I just needed sleep. Shoko pressed 2 fingers to his neck. No feber. Pulse is steady. Does your chest physically hurt? No, Ren said. Just empty. Gojo stopped chewing. He tilted his head, watching Ren for a second. Then he snapped his fingers. Ah, I get it. Gojo pointed his half-eaten crepe at Ren. The heavenly restriction. Ren raised an eyebrow. What about it? Your body is adapting, Gojo beamed. When you copied Maki's physical stats, you essentially hijacked a heavenly restriction blueprint. But you still had a tiny, useless drop of civilian cursed energy left over. Your body is just flushing out the last of the garbage to finish the upgrade. It's rejecting the energy to optimize your muscles. Ren let out a slow breath, nodding like the logic made perfect sense. So I'm just turning into a complete meathead. Exactly. Gojo chirped, taking a loud slurp of his iced latte. It's totally harmless. You'll just be completely empty soon. Shoko sighed. She clicked the penlight off and walked back to her chair. If you start coughing up blood, come back. Otherwise, get out of my morgue. Ren rested his elbows on his knees. He brought the plastic cup back to his mouth and took a slow sip. Behind the plastic lid, the corner of his mouth ticked upward. Lowering the drink, he set the cup on the steel desk, the ice clinking in the quiet room. He didn't correct Gojo. If the strongest sorcerer alive wanted to invent his own reasons for Ren's fading energy, that made things easier. Since you're here, Ren said, reaching into the canvas bag at his feet. Do me a favor. Since you're here, Ren said, reaching into the canvas bag at his feet. Do me a favor. He pulled out a matte, charcoal gray scabbard. Resting it across his knees, the dark veins in the metal seemed to pulse under the harsh clinic lights. Gojo stopped chewing. He hooked a finger under his black blindfold, pulling it down just enough to expose one bright blue eye. I'm not paying for another broken window. Neither am I, Shoko muttered without looking up. Take that thing outside. It won't blow up this time, Ren said. He popped the guard with his thumb, sliding the blade out an inch. The abyssal black spine and silver edge caught the light. I tweaked it. It should eat energy on impact now instead of repelling it. But since I'm running on empty, I can't test it. He held the hilt out. Just give it a spark. Gojo smirked, easily taking the bait. He didn't grab the hilt. He just stepped forward, held out a single finger, and pressed it flat against the exposed silver steel. The air pressure in the room instantly dropped. Gojo didn't give it a spark. He dumped a heavy, dense stream of raw, cursed energy straight into the metal. The dark veins on the blade flared a bright, volatile purple. A blue interface snapped into Ren's vision, the numbers blurring as they climbed. Dimensional inventory, cursed energy retention, active. Current storage, 5,000 out of 50,000 units. Current storage, 22,000 out of 50,000 units. Current storage, 50,000 out of 50,000 units. Max capacity reached. 3 seconds. The sword vibrated violently in Ren's hands, absolutely gorged. Gojo blinked. He pulled his finger back, staring at the blade with genuine surprise. It actually swallowed it. He let out a short laugh. Scary little toy. Hit a curse with that, and you'll suck them dry. Yeah, Ren said. He tossed the weapon into his canvas duffel bag and stood up, slinging the strap over his shoulder. Thanks for the juice box, Satoru, Ren said, picking up his half-empty caramel latte. He looked over at the desk. Shoko, don't work too hard. I'll bring you actual coffee next time. Just lock the door on your way out, she muttered, not looking up from her autopsy notes. Ren gave a lazy two-finger salute and walked out. The heavy metal door of the clinic clicked shut behind him, sealing the quiet hum of the morgue back in. Inside the clinic, the silence stretched for a few long seconds. Gojo didn't move. He stood perfectly still, his single exposed blue eye staring blankly at the space where Ren had just been. The goofy, energetic aura he had walked in with was completely gone. Shoko let out a slow breath. She set her pen down on the stainless steel desk and reached for her pack of cigarettes. Are you going to say it, or do I have to? She asked, sparking her lighter. Gojo tilted his head. He finally hooked a finger under his blindfold and pulled it back into place, snapping the black fabric over his eyes. Say what? Don't play dumb with me, Satoru, Shoko muttered. She exhaled a thin stream of gray smoke. I can feel your output. You just dumped enough raw energy into that metal to level a city block. A cursed tool is just a cup. When you pour water in, the cup fills up. I should be choking on the residual pressure in this room right now. She looked straight at him, her dark circles making her glare look even sharper. But the sword didn't fill up. So where did it go? A slow, genuine smile crept onto Gojo's face. He reached over and took a massive bite of his strawberry crepe, chewing thoughtfully before he answered. That's the best part, Shoko, Gojo said, his voice dropping its usual playful pitch. It went nowhere. Shoko frowned, snapping her lighter shut. Satoru, energy doesn't just cease to exist. Even if the blade ate it, you should be able to track your own signature. I should, Gojo agreed, holding up his bandaged finger. My eyes see the flow of the world. I watch energy shift, convert to heat, or settle into an object. But the second mine touched that steel. He paused, a rare look of absolute fascination crossing his face. It dropped completely off the map. No compression, no conversión. It's like pouring water into a bottomless hole. It was just erased. Shoko stared at him. She knew exactly what the six eyes were capable of. For Gojo to completely lose track of his own energy meant. You're telling me, Shoko started, her voice completely flat, that a high school kid is walking around with a special grade tool that just casually deletes matter from existence? Looks like it, Gojo chirped, instantly snapping back into his obnoxious, upbeat self. He grabbed his iced latte and took a loud, slurping sip. Our boy Ren is full of fun little secrets. I can't wait to see what he does next. Choco stared at him for a long, silent moment. She rubbed her temples, the beginnings of a severe migraine already pulsing behind her eyes. What a drag, she muttered, crushing her cigarette into the glass tray. Get out of my morgue. Ren adjusted the canvas strap on his shoulder, a quiet, upbeat tune humming in his throat as he walked down the cobblestone path. He mentally pulled up the blue screen one more time, just to look at it. Current storage, 50,000 out of 50,000 units. He swiped it away, a satisfied smirk on his face. He knew Gojo was a monster, but maxing out a level 2 inventory in 3 seconds? The guy hadn't even broken a sweat. He was literally holding a strawberry crepe in his other hand. Sure, Gojo was definitely suspicious now. You don't just erase that much cursed energy from reality without the 6 eyes noticing something is off. Ren didn't care. As long as the system stayed completely hidden, it didn't matter. But as he rounded the corner, I'm telling you, it's the foundation that matters. Yuji's voice echoed across the training field, full of burning conviction. Tall girls with a big ass. It's like Jennifer Lawrence. You can't beat that level of structural integrity. Wrong. Absolutely wrong. Panda's deep voice boomed back. The massive cursed corpse was standing with his arms crossed, shaking his heavy head. You are ignoring the sheer, undeniable power of upper body aerodynamics. A generous chest is the pinnacle of human evolution. It's comforting. It's soft. Benito flakes. Toj Inumaki chimed in, nodding solemnly with the collar of his uniform pulled up over his mouth. Standing a few feet away, Megumi Fushiguro was aggressively rubbing his temples, looking like he wanted to summon his divine dogs just to put himself out of his misery. Beside him, Nobara Kujisaki was white-knuckling her hammer, a deeply terrifying vein popping out on her forehead. If either of you disgusting animals say one more word about female anatomy, Nobara threatened, her voice dropping to a lethal whisper, I am going to use resonance on your actual brains. Run let out a quiet sigh, adjusting the strap of his bag. He tried to smoothly alter his trajectory to bypass the courtyard entirely, but his preternaturally handsome trait practically made him a walking beacon. Rain! Yuji spotted him instantly, waving his arms frantically. Hey, Rain, get over here. Damn it, Rin thought, plastering on a relaxed, easygoing smile as he strolled over to the group. Afternoon sounded like a highly tactical debate from over there. Are we mapping out curse weak points? Damn it, Rin thought, plastering on a relaxed, easygoing smile as he strolled over to the group. Afternoon sounded like a highly tactical debate from over there. Are we mapping out curse weak points? Better, Panda said, stepping forward and placing a heavy, furry paw on Ren's shoulder. We are mapping out the truth of the universe. Settle this for us. Yuji thinks tall girls with big butts are the absolute peak. I am firmly defending the undeniable superiority of a massive chest. Panda leaned in, his beady eyes narrowing. You've got the face of a guy with experience. What's the verdict? Nobara let out a loud, dramatic groan, crossing her arms and glaring at him, daring him to give a stupid answer. Ren blinked, the sheer absurdity of the interrogation hitting him. But the moment his brain processed the question, his thoughts immediately, traitorously went to the Zenin sisters. He thought about the hotel room with Maki in Kamakura. He pictured her athletic, deeply toned physique, the direct result of her heavenly restriction, and how perfectly it was shaped. He wasn't going to lie to himself. Maki had her sister completely beat in that department. Mai was stunning, of course, with that elegant runway model strut and a sharp defensive edge, but Maki was built exactly how a fighter should be built, with surprisingly generous, perfect curves hiding under her bulky jiu-jitsu uniform. If I say big chest, Maki is going to somehow sense it from Hokkaido and come back just to stab me, Ren thought dryly. If I say big ass, Nobara is going to hit me with a hammer right now. Ren chuckled, slipping his hands casually into his jacket pockets. He locked eyes with Yuji and Panda, putting on a perfectly deadpan, philosophical expression. You guys are looking at it all wrong, Ren said smoothly. It's not about isolating the parts. It's about the attitude that comes with the package. Yuji tilted his head, genuinely captivated. Attitude. Yeah, Ren nodded, leaning back slightly. The ideal woman is the one who could completely kick your ass without breaking a sweat, but still looks impossibly good wearing nothing but your oversized black t-shirt the morning after. The courtyard went dead silent. Panda's jaw literally dropped. Yuji stared at him, his eyes wide with profound, starstruck realization, as if Ran had just handed him the meaning of life. Salmon, Toj whispered in sheer awe. Even Megumi paused his temple rubbing, looking at Ran with a mixture of mild surprise and grudging respect. Nobara, however, just scoffed. She lowered her hammer, though the lethal aura around her dissipated. Run, wait! Yuji yelled after him, snapping out of his trance. Who wears your oversized t-shirts? Reim. Run just waved a hand over his shoulder, not looking back. With his energy reserves fully charged and the timeline quietly shifting in his favor, he finally let himself laugh as he disappeared into the shadow of the dorms. The lock clicked shut. Run dropped his canvas duffel bag onto the floor and kicked off his boots. He tossed his jacket over a chair and fell backward onto the mattress. The springs creaked under his weight. He stared at the ceiling, enjoying the absolute lack of noise in the room. No gojo, no curses, no teenagers arguing in the courtyard. Just a quiet dorm room. He closed his eyes. Peace. Actual beautiful peace. Knock. 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 Ren didn't move. He just stared at the ceiling, actively willing whoever was on the other side of the wood to spontaneously combust. 3 sharp, deliberate taps. It definitely wasn't Yuji or Panda. They usually pounded on the door like they were trying to break it off the hinges. With a heavy groan, he dragged himself off the mattress. I swear, if this is Satoru with more machi. He yanked the door open, the annoyance fully written across his face. Look, I already told you guys, I'm not. The words died in his throat. It wasn't Gojo, and it definitely wasn't one of the students. A tall woman stood in the hallway, looking completely out of place in the dingy dorms. She wore a pristine, dark-tailored uniform. Long, pale blue hair was woven into thick braids, with one draped directly down the center of her face like she couldn't be bothered to move it. She was casually tapping a sleek smartphone against her chin, sizing him up with a calm smile. Ren's brain immediately screamed her name. Mei Mei, Grade 1 sorcerer, lethal with a battle axe, and entirely, ruthlessly motivated by cold, hard cash. But as Ren, the random transfer student, he wasn't supposed to have a clue. He quickly killed the recognition in his eyes, morphing his expression into a perfect mask of polite, slightly irritated confusion. Can I help you? He asked, keeping his tone perfectly neutral. So you're Ren, she said. Her voice was smooth, carrying the relaxed confidence of someone who knew exactly how much she was worth. I was curious what Satoru dragged onto campus this time. Ren leaned against the doorframe, crossing his arms. He wasn't about to give her anything for free. I just punch hard. Who are you? Mei Mei. I'm a colleague of Satoru's, she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Though I charge a much higher consultation fee than he does. Ren scoffed, leaning easily into his broke student persona. Well, you're knocking on the wrong door. I don't have any money. Mei let out a soft, polite laugh. It sounded nice, but it had all the warmth of a cash register opening. No, I suppose a student wouldn't, but you do have value. Satoru doesn't hide things unless they're worth hiding. And Yudahime mentioned a boy with a very loud, unregistered sword blowing out windows. Run kept his face completely blank, though internally he was cursing Gojo, Yaga, and Yudahime for having that loud argument about his special grade katana right outside his room. Must be someone else. Of course, Mei agreed easily. She didn't press him. Pushing too hard wasn't her style. She was just planting seeds. Reaching into her pocket, she pulled out a heavy, expensive-looking business card and held it out. Ren took it. It was minimalist, just her name and a number. If you ever find yourself needing a favor, or if you decide you want to put those unique physical skills to profitable use, call me, she said. She turned on her heel, her boots clicking sharply against the floorboards. Pausing at the top of the stairs, she glanced back over her shoulder. Just remember, my loyalty is entirely for sale. Make sure you can afford it before you dial. Run watched her disappear down the stairwell. He looked at the card, shaking his head. The woman was literally a walking mercenary. He stepped back inside, locked the deadbolt, and tossed the card onto the nightstand. Dumping his jacket on the chair, he collapsed back onto the bed. So much for peace and quiet. Run stared at the ceiling, flipping Mei's heavy business card between his fingers. He tossed it onto the nightstand, letting it land with a soft thud. Why did she actually come here? There was no way Satoru sent her. If Gojo wanted to check on him, he would have just kicked the door down himself. She was fishing. Yudahime and Yaga must have complained loud enough about his unregistered special grade sword that the rumor slipped off campus. A weapon as capable as Nightfall was exactly the kind of prize a mercenary like Mei would want to appraise or steal. He let out a slow breath. He just had to keep his head down for 2 more days. A sharp, synthetic chime pinged in his head. The dim room was instantly bathed in the familiar, soft blue glow of the system interface. A translucent panel snapped into existence directly above his face, hovering inches from his nose. Ren frowned, his combat instincts flaring for a fraction of a second. He hadn't mentally summoned the interface, and he definitely hadn't killed any curses on his walk back from the clinic. The scrolling text locked into place. Achievement unlocked. Milestone maximum capacity reached. Condition met. Successfully stockpile 50,000 cursed energy units and completely fill a level 2-dimensional inventory energy storage. Hidden condition met. Flash flood. Transition from baseline storage to maximum capacity in under 60 seconds. Time recorded, 3.14 seconds. Rewards dispensed. Plus 5,000 system points. Base milestone reward. Plus 5,000 system points. Speed bonus. Run stared at the glowing blue text. 10,000 points just for letting Gojo poke his sword for 3 seconds. He let out a quiet, disbelieving laugh, dropping his head back against the mattress. That was literally the easiest payout of my life, he muttered to the empty room. He dismissed the achievement notification and pulled up his main status page. With the new deposit, his current balance updated to exactly 25,000 system points. It wasn't enough to buy any game-breaking innate techniques just yet, but having a solid stash of currency heading into Halloween was a massive relief. The blue... I know you're in there. I can hear the air conditioner. Yuji yelled from the hallway. Run reached out blindly, grabbing his phone from the nightstand.
7:15 a.m.
October 30th. Run rolled over and rubbed his face. He threw the blanket off, grabbed a clean black t-shirt from his desk chair, and pulled it over his head. He unlocked the deadbolt and yanked the door open. Yuji stood in the hallway, fully dressed in his dark uniform, holding a half-eaten convenience store egg sandwich. Morning, Yuji said around a mouthful of bread. It's barely sunrise, Rin muttered, leaning against the doorframe. He squinted against the harsh fluorescent light of the hallway. Yuji swallowed the bite of his sandwich and pointed the remaining half at Ren. Nanami-san wants us at Shibuya Station by 8. Ren stared at him. 8 in the morning, on a Friday. Yeah, something about pre-Halloween crowd control and cleaning some curses before the city gets too crazy, Yuji explained, completely unbothered by the early hour. Fushiguro is already waiting by the campus gates. Oh, and Nobara said if you make us late, you have to pay for her breakfast. Run rubbed the back of his neck. Shibuya Station. I'm ignoring the threat about breakfast, Rin said. Give me 2 minutes. He pushed the door shut, leaving Yuji in the hall. He didn't bother showering. He grabbed his uniform jacket from the chair and hoisted his canvas duffel bag off the floor. The matte gray scabbard of his special grade katana clunked heavily against his back as he pulled the strap over his shoulder. He grabbed his boots and headed out. Down at the campus gates, Nanami stood by the stone pillars, checking his wristwatch. He wore his usual tan suit. Megumi stood next to him, scrolling quietly on his phone, while Nobara aggressively tapped her foot. Hundreds of miles north of Tokyo, the freezing wind howled through the dense, snow-dusted pines of Shiratoko National Park in Hokkaido. Maki's boots kicked through the knee-deep snow. The wind off the Sea of Okhotsk bit at her face, freezing the stray hairs escaping her ponytail. She swung her wooden naginata at a dead pine branch blocking the trail. The wood exploded. Maki stopped. Wood chips scattered across the white drifts. She looked at the blade of her polearm, then down at her gloved hands. She pulled her right glove off with her teeth and spit it into the snow. Staring at her bare palm, she pressed her thumb into the center of it. The persistent, annoying buzz of her cursed energy, the tiny drop that had anchored her to the bottom of the Zenin clan her entire life, was fading. It wasn't just fading, it was being actively pulled. It's draining, she murmured, her breath pluming in the freezing air. She squeezed her hand into a fist. The tendons in her wrist and forearm locked tight as steel cables. She could feel the exact density of her own bones. She was strong. No matter how hard Maki trained, she could never reach absolute zero unless the other side of the scale shifted. For her ceiling to break, Mai's energy had to be vanishing, too. Maki lowered the naginata. The cold wind suddenly felt a lot sharper. Why would Mai's cursed energy be dropping? She only knew of 2 things that could drain a sorcerer that fast: a fatal injury or a lethal binding vow. Mai, Maki said, the word cutting sharply through the quiet woods. She shoved her bare hand deep into her coat pocket and yanked out her phone. The screen was black. She held down the power button, pressing it until her thumb ached. Nothing. The battery had died a long time ago, and even if it hadn't, there wasn't a single bar of service out here in the mountains anyway. Damn it! She shoved the dead plastic back into her pocket. The rush of the sudden power upgrade completely vanished, replaced by a tight, heavy knot in her chest. The silence of the woods felt mocking. She was completely cut off, standing in the middle of nowhere while her sister might be bleeding out. She gripped the naginata with both hands. She raised the heavy wooden polearm and slammed the blunt end down into the frozen earth. She just wanted to hit something. She didn't even put her full weight behind it, but the impact sounded like a mortar shell detonating. A massive shockwave blasted the snow away in a perfect circle. Deep, jagged fissures shrieked across the solid ice, spiderwebbing out from the base of her weapon in all directions. Maki froze, staring at the cracks. A deep, structural groan echoed from right beneath her boots. Before she could even shift her weight, the forest floor gave out. The ground simply opened up and swallowed her. Maki dropped into empty air, surrounded by hundreds of pounds of collapsing ice and frozen dirt. She plummeted into the dark, twisting her body on pure instinct. She hit solid rock hard. She tucked her shoulder, rolling to bleed off the massive momentum, and skidded across a smooth stone floor. Snow and dirt rained down on her from the jagged hole 30 feet above. Maki stayed on one knee, gripping her weapon. She blinked, coughing as the dust settled, and looked around. She wasn't in a dirt cave. Faint, pale blue light pulsed slowly from the walls. She was kneeling in the middle of a massive, perfectly carved stone corridor, buried deep underground. The air down here felt heavy, thick with the distinct, oppressive hum of a high-level barrier. She looked up at the hole she had just accidentally punched through solid bedrock, then looked down at her bare hand. "You've got to be kidding me," she muttered. Maki pushed herself up, brushing a clump of freezing dirt off her shoulder. She walked forward, her boots echoing sharply against the smooth stone. The pale blue light seeped from the carved masonry, casting long, warped shadows ahead of her. The air was stale, completely devoid of the sharp pine scent from the surface. It smelled like ancient dust and stagnant cold. "Place feels like a damn tomb," she muttered, her voice bouncing off the high ceiling. She didn't slow down to admire the architecture. If this was the vault holding the eight-fanged sword, she was going to grab it and immediately find a way back to the surface. She needed a working phone. The corridor opened up into a wide antechamber, ending abruptly at a set of massive, floor-to-ceiling doors. They were carved from solid granite, completely seamless, without a handle or a lock in sight. A thick layer of dust coated the stone, untouched for centuries. Maki walked right up to the center seam, pressed her bare left palm flat against the granite, and shoved. The stone shrieked. Decades of sediment broke apart in a cloud of gray dust as the massive slab gave way. Maki barely even leaned her weight into it, but the granite swung inward with a heavy, grinding scrape, yielding to her hand like a cheap wooden gate. She stepped through the dust cloud and into the dark. Mai lay flat on her back, staring at the ceiling of her Kyoto dorm. Her hands still smelled faintly of harsh solvent and gun oil. Yudaheim hadn't been bluffing. She had spent the entire previous evening and most of this morning scrubbing every single blade and rifle in the armory. She closed her eyes, just wanting to sleep. A weird, cold flutter sparked right behind her ribs. Mai frowned in the quiet room. She pressed the heel of her hand flat against her stomach. It didn't feel like nausea. It felt hollow. She held up her right hand and concentrated, trying to pull a basic, tiny spark of cursed energy to her fingertips. Usually, her energy felt like a heavy, sluggish weight she had to forcefully drag to the surface. This time, the energy sparked, flickered violently, and just vanished.
Mai sat up.
She tried again, pushing harder. The energy pooled for a fraction of a second, then immediately slipped away, like water pouring straight through a cracked glass. Her internal reserves were dropping, not burning out from using her technique. Draining. "What the hell?" she whispered. She checked her arms, pulled the collar of her shirt down to check her chest. Nothing. No curse marks, no injuries, no lingering effects from a fight. Just a steady, quiet siphon actively pulling her energy out of her body. There was no logical reason for it, unless it had something to do with the only major thing that had changed in her life 24 hours ago. She snatched her phone off the nightstand. She bypassed Yudaheim and Principal Gakiganji, pulling up Ren's contact, and hit dial. It rang twice. The muffled, echoing announcements of a busy Tokyo train station bled through the speaker. "Miss me already?" Ren asked, his voice smooth and entirely unbothered. "What did you do to me?"
Me demanded.
She swung her legs off the mattress, gripping the phone tight enough to make the plastic creak. "Good morning to you too," Ren said. "I'm currently standing outside Shibuya Station with Nanami. Want to narrow that accusation down a bit. I'm not joking, Ren. My cursed energy." She stood up, pacing the short length of her dorm. It's just leaving. It's leaking out of nowhere. I can't hold a single spark. Ren stopped walking. He drifted toward a concrete pillar, letting Nanami, Megumi, and Nobara move a few steps ahead into the morning commuter rush. He pulled the phone away from his ear and tapped the mute button. He stared blankly at the ticket gates. The system had explicitly stated it was using Mai's natural signature as a siphon. It hadn't said a single word about taking hers. System, Ren muttered under his breath. A translucent blue panel snapped into existence, hovering faintly over the blur of passing business suits. What the hell did you do? Ren whispered, keeping his back to Nanami and the others. Explain why her energy is dropping. Explain why her energy is dropping. The blue text blurred and instantly reformed into a new block of data. Query acknowledged. Target energy depletion. Core condition. Under Jujutsu parameters, the heavenly restriction blueprint you acquired is tied to Maki Zenin. Because she is a twin, her soul is split with my Zenin. The requirement, for Maki to unlock her complete heavenly restriction, the total cursed energy of that shared soul must hit absolute zero. This requires Mai to either die or be entirely drained of her reserves. The chain reaction, because your upgrade is directly copied from Maki's blueprint, Maki must achieve her full awakening first. By establishing the Twin Soul Bridge, the system is actively draining Mai's energy to force Maki's restriction to complete. Run stood perfectly still amid the rush of commuters. He read the text twice, his face settling into a completely plain, unreadable mask. So, Ren murmured, his voice barely audible over the station noise. Mai is going to lose all her cursed energy. All of it. Affirmative target's natural reserves will reach permanent zero. She will be reduced to civilian status. You piece of garbage, Ren hissed, his voice lethal but kept low enough to drown in the station noise. Why the hell didn't you mention this yesterday? You told me it would siphon my energy. You didn't say a damn word about permanently crippling her. The blue screen flickered, entirely unbothered by his anger. Omission logic, the system operates strictly for the host's survival and evolution. Collateral damage to secondary targets is deemed irrelevant unless it directly impedes the host's progress. You did not ask about her status. Ren closed his eyes, pinching the bridge of his nose. Arguing with a piece of software was a waste of time, especially with the Shibuya clock ticking down. I don't care about your logic. Fix it, Ren demanded, his eyes snapping open to glare at the interface. I am not leaving her as a blind, defenseless civilian right before a war breaks out. Give me a workaround. Now. The glowing text blurred, processing the command before locking into a new, structured menu. Calculating alternatives. Solution found. Soul signature camouflage cost. 5,000 system points. Description. The system can artificially spoof the target's soul signature. In the eyes of Jujutsu law and the Heavenly Restriction Pact, her energy will read as absolute zero, triggering the completion of the upgrade for Maki Zenin and consequently the host. Result. My Zenin will retain a microscopic, localized trace of cursed energy. It will be just enough to allow her to see curses and retain her status as a sorcerer, preventing complete civilian regression. Ren stared at the screen. Do it. Buy it. Transaction complete. 5,000 system points deducted. Current balance, 20,000 SP. Soul signature camouflage applied to target. My Zenin. Great, Ren muttered. But that still leaves her with a massive problem. A microscopic trace of energy isn't going to fuel construction. She can't even make a single bullet with that. Secondary solution. Inventory proxy terminal. The host can designate a physical medium, such as a ring, bracelet, or necklace, as a remote access terminal. By gifting this item to the target, she will be granted authorized access to the host's dimensional inventory. She will not have her own internal reserves, but she will be able to wirelessly siphon and utilize the cursed energy currently stockpiled in your storage to fuel her innate technique.
Rein blinkt.
The anger bleeding out of him was instantly replaced by cold, calculating relief. If he gave my a proxy item, she wouldn't just be surviving. She'd be tapping into a massive, special grade-level reservoir of energy. She usually gassed out after making a single bullet. With a direct line to his 50,000 units of stolen energy, a cap that would only increase as his inventory leveled up, she would have more firepower than she ever had in her life. He could just use his sword to keep the tank full. He lifted his phone back to his ear and tapped the unmute button. Through the speaker, he could hear my taking sharp, panicked breaths. The tough, unapproachable Zenin facade had completely shattered, leaving behind the terrified reality of a girl who knew exactly how ruthless her clan was to the weak. "Rein, are you there? Answer me," she demanded, her voice cracking. "I'm here," Ren said softly, dropping his casual tone entirely. He leaned into the concrete pillar, sheltering the phone from the noise. "Calm down, Mai. Just breathe. I've got you." "Rein." The flat, exhausted voice of Kento Nanami cut through the station noise. Ren glanced over his shoulder. The blonde Grade 1 sorcerer was tapping his wristwatch, looking thoroughly unimpressed. Megumi was staring at him with mild annoyance, and Nobara already had her hands on her hips, fully prepared to yell at him for holding up the mission. "Hey, Nanami-san," Rin called out, instantly slapping a look of pained urgency onto his face. He hunched over slightly, clutching his stomach. "I think that convenience store egg sandwich Yuji gave me was sitting out in the sun. My stomach is tearing itself apart. I need to find a restroom right now." Nobara immediately took a step back, her face twisting in disgust. Keep your biological warfare away from me. Go." Nanami let out a slow, soul-crushing sigh. "Catch up when you are functional." "Will do," Rin called back. He didn't wait for them to turn around. He immediately bolted in the opposite direction, weaving aggressively through the sea of morning commuters until he found a quiet, empty alcove near the station's coin lockers. Leaning against the cool metal lockers, he brought the phone back to his mouth. The second the speaker clicked on, Mai was already talking. "Not a joke, Ren. It's draining. If Yudaheim or the principal notice, the clan will find out I can't even." "Meh." "Don't mind me. Why are you acting so calm right now? You have to tell me what to do, because if I..." "Meh." "Shut up." The sharp command cut straight through her panic. The line went dead quiet. "Don't speak," Rin said, keeping his voice entirely level. "Just listen to me. Get dressed. Sneak out of the dorms and go to Kyoto Station. I will be there in exactly 2 hours." "What?" The sheer confusion in her voice temporarily overrode the panic. "You just said you were at Shibuya." "I'll be there in 2 hours," Rin repeated. His tone left absolutely zero room for argument. "Get dressed, get to the station, and don't let anyone see you leave." Sitting alone on the edge of her mattress, Mai didn't have the energy left to fight him. The quiet certainty in his voice grounded her, cutting through the static in her head. She swallowed the tight knot in her throat and gave a small, physical nod to the empty room. "Okay," she whispered. The line went dead. Ren lowered the phone and slipped it into his jacket pocket. He pushed off the cold metal of the coin lockers, turning his back on the concourse where Nanami, Megumi, and Nobara were waiting. They would figure out he ditched them eventually, but right now that was the least of his problems. He merged back into the heavy, fast-moving flow of the morning commute. Ignoring the signs for the local Tokyo metro lines, he followed the overhead boards toward the main JR ticket office. He stepped up to an open automated kiosk, tapped the glass screen, and bought a one-way Shinkansen ticket to Kyoto. The Shinkansen pulled into Kyoto Station exactly 2 hours later. Rin stepped off the train and bypassed the heavy tourist crowds, heading straight for the central concourse. He spotted Mai waiting near a row of automated ticket machines. She was leaning against a tiled pillar, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. The second she caught sight of him walking toward her, she deliberately snapped her gaze in the opposite direction, fixing her attention on a digital departure board. A deep, stubborn pout settled on her face.
Rein smiled.
He closed the distance and stopped right in front of her. Mai immediately looked at the floor. She shifted her weight, actively pretending he was completely invisible. "If you keep acting angry," Rin said, keeping his voice casual, "I will kiss you right in front of everyone, and you won't be able to stop me." A rush of red flared across her cheeks. Despite the obvious flush, she kept her chin tilted away, refusing to break her silent strike or acknowledge he had spoken. Rin didn't give her another warning. He stepped directly into her space, placed a hand flat against the tiled pillar beside her head, and leaned in. He caught her lips in a firm, deliberate kiss, pinning her flat against the wall. Mai's eyes snapped wide open. She let out a muffled, startled gasp against his mouth. Both of her hands flew up to grip the lapels of his jacket, though she made absolutely zero effort to push him away. The commuter foot traffic flowing around them didn't stop, but the complaints started almost immediately. "Honestly, no manners at all," an older woman muttered loudly, glaring as she pulled her rolling suitcase past them. "Youngsters these days," a businessman scoffed, speed-walking toward the ticket gates. Ren ignored them, keeping her pinned just a second longer before pulling back. He looked down at her. Her defensive walls were completely shattered, her face burning a violent crimson as she stared up at him, still gripping his jacket. "Better?" he asked. Mai's grip on his jacket didn't loosen. She stared at him, her chest heaving. The sheer mortification of the crowd, stacked on top of the absolute terror she'd been holding on to all morning, finally cracked her composure. Her dark eyes glassed over, welling up with furious, humiliated tears. "You're a bully," she whispered, her voice actually shaking. Run dropped his hand from the tiled wall. The teasing smile completely left his face. "First you yell at me on the phone," she accused, her voice rising as she shoved hard against his chest. "You tell me to shut up. You treat me like an idiot. And then you come here and make a spectacle out of me in front of half the city." She drove the toe of her leather boot sharply into his shin. Ren took the hit without a word. He caught her wrists before she could wind up for another strike. She struggled for a second, then just stopped, letting her head drop forward against his collarbone. She took a ragged breath, actively trying to hide her face from the passing commuters. "I'm sorry," Ren said quietly. He let go of her wrists and put a hand on her back, guiding her away from the pillar. "Come on, let's get out of the open." She didn't argue. She kept her head down, walking closely beside him as he navigated them away from the central concourse. They bypassed the main exits and food courts, heading down a quiet, narrow service corridor that led toward the station's administrative offices. Run found an empty alcove housing a row of inactive vending machines and a single metal bench. The roar of the station was muted here, reduced to a dull, echoing hum. Mai sat down heavily on the bench. She pulled her knees together and wrapped her arms around herself, staring at the scuffed linoleum floor. The fierce, untouchable Zenin pride she always wore like armor was gone, leaving her looking incredibly small. Ren slid his hand to her waist, pulling her slightly closer on the metal bench. Mai didn't resist. The remaining tension drained out of her, and she let out a long, exhausted sigh, resting her head heavily on his shoulder. "You're completely shameless," she muttered, her voice muffled against his jacket. "Don't ever kiss me in a crowded place like that again. It's embarrassing." Ren chuckled, the sound vibrating against her cheek. Okay, fair enough. I'll just kiss you as much as I want in places that aren't crowded. Like here, right? She lifted her head from his shoulder, her eyes narrowing as she opened her mouth to shoot back a retort. He didn't let her. Run caught her chin, tilted her face up, and kissed her. There was no audience this time. He didn't rush it. He leaned in, shifting his weight to pull her against him. Mai's initial surprise melted almost instantly. Her hands slid up his chest, her fingers gripping the dark fabric of his shirt as she kissed him back. He didn't stop, keeping her pulled close until her grip tightened, and she let out a quiet, breathless sound against his mouth. When he finally broke the kiss, she slumped back against the bench, her face flushed and her chest rising and falling with short, uneven breaths. Ren stayed close, brushing his thumb lightly across her cheek. "I missed you," he said quietly. Mai pouted, turning her face slightly away, though she didn't actually move her body from his side. "You'd better have," she muttered. "Otherwise I'd." She trailed off, settling for a sharp, stubborn humph. Run just smiled, letting the quiet hum of the station wash over them. 10 minutes later, the reality of the situation had been laid out on the table. Rin skipped the deep mechanics of the system, keeping the explanation grounded in jujitsu facts she already understood. Twin souls, Maki's heavenly restriction, and the inevitable bridge pulling them toward absolute zero. Mai sat perfectly still, staring at the opposite wall. "So," she finally said, her voice flat, "I have to lose my energy for Maki to have her pact completed." "Yeah," Rin said. He didn't sugarcoat it. "But you aren't going to lose all of it. I found a workaround. You'll keep just enough to see curses and retain your status. You aren't dropping back to a civilian." Mai let out a bitter, hollow laugh. "Great. I'm a sorcerer with enough energy to see the monsters, but not enough to actually do anything about them. A single bullet used to exhaust me." Run looked down at her for a second, then shook his head. "You're unbelievable."
Mefroned.
"What now?" Instead of answering, he leaned down and pressed a kiss against her cheek. The fight went out of her instantly, a fresh rush of red hitting her face.
Rein.
"Don't get discouraged so fast, princess," he said, reaching into his jacket pocket. "What's that?" she asked. "Something I made on the train." "You made jewelry?" "Try not to sound so shocked," he said. She grabbed the pendant from his hand. The metal felt strangely heavy. Turning it over, she noticed tiny engraved letters worked into the design. R. M. Ren.
Me.
Maki. Her eyes lifted. For once, Ren looked slightly awkward. "It took longer than I expected," he muttered. "How long?" He shrugged. "Couple hours." That answer immediately sounded suspicious. Mai narrowed her eyes. "How much did this cost you?" "A lot."
Rein.
He sighed. 5,000 units. Mai blinked, her brain stalling on the phrasing. "Units? You mean 5,000 yen?" Ren held her gaze for a split second, then just gave a single, simple nod. "You spent 5,000 yen on random metal?" Mai stared at him like he had lost his mind. "I could buy a decent lunch with that." "You were busy having a crisis. I was busy being productive," he said smoothly. He gestured toward her hand. "Relax. I have more." Mai looked down at the necklace resting quietly in her palm, still shaking her head at his financial choices. "What does it even do?" Ren's smile returned. "There she is." "What?" "The part where you stop panicking and start asking useful questions." Mai rolled her eyes. "Answer me." He took the necklace from her hands and stepped behind her. She felt his fingers brush the back of her neck as he fastened it into place. The pendant settled against her collarbone. For a moment, nothing happened. I looked down. "Okay," Ren stepped back. Use construction. She blinked. What? Make a bullet? Run. I literally just told you I can't. Humor me. She let out a long sigh. Fine. Her hand lifted. She focused, reaching for her technique, reaching for the tiny spark that should have been there. The second her cursed energy touched the necklace, it sparked with a sharp snap. A perfectly formed 9mm brass casing dropped onto the scuffed linoleum with a sharp clink. I didn't even blink. Her hand was still outstretched. She hadn't strained, braced herself, or squeezed her eyes shut. There was no familiar headache, no heavy exhaustion settling into her chest. Instead of trying to wring a single drop of water from a dry sponge, her technique had just tapped straight into an ocean. She stared at the bullet by her boot, then slowly looked up at Ren. What is this? She asked, her voice hushed. A battery, Ren said, leaning back against the dead vending machine. The metal itself stores cursed energy. When you use construction, the pendant bypasses your empty tank and pulls whatever you need straight from the necklace. I wrapped her fingers around the metal pendant. It was humming faintly against her skin, dense and alive. How much is in here? Right now? About the equivalent of a baseline special grade, Ren said casually. I choked on her next breath. A what? It holds a lot, he clarified, crossing his arms. But don't go crazy with it. Keep a couple of things in mind. First, it's not infinite. If you start spamming sniper rifles and artillery shells, you will drain it. Treat it like a massive magazine, not a cheat code. Make your shots count. Second, it can be recharged. If you feel the feed getting low, find someone with a lot of juice and have them pump their cursed energy straight into the pendant. It absorbs foreign energy automatically and stores it for you to use. I frowned, her tactical brain immediately tearing into the logistics. Someone else. Like who? Yudaheim? Todo. Anyone, Ren confirmed. Just don't explain what it actually does. Tell them it's a quirky curse tool that needs a jumpstart. Satoru actually topped it off yesterday in about 3 seconds without even breaking a sweat. Mai just stared at him. You scammed Satoru Gojo into charging this necklace? Yeah, kind of, Ren corrected smoothly. Look, the point is you aren't defenseless. You lost your natural reserves, but you just gained a special grade battery. Mai stared at the silver chain. Her thumb rubbed back and forth over the engraved letters. You know you didn't have to do this, she muttered, her voice dropping low. She refused to look at him, keeping her focus entirely on the scuffed linoleum. I mean, it's a waste.
Ren frownede.
A waste. I'm not that strong anyway, she mumbled, kicking half-heartedly at the brass bullet near her boot. Even with enough cursed energy, construction is slow. I just sit in the back and take potshots while others do the actual work. You shouldn't have spent all that on me. Ren pushed off the vending machine. He stepped into her space, hooked a knuckle under her chin, and nudged her head up. I tried to avert her gaze, but his grip was firm. He stared down at her, his expression entirely unamused by the self-pity. Then he pulled his hand back and delivered a sharp, open-handed slap to her cheek. It wasn't a heavy blow, but the sudden smack was loud in the quiet alcove. A hot, quick sting instantly bloomed across her skin. I gasped, her eyes snapping wide. Her hand flew to her face. What the hell is wrong with? Stop! Ren cut her off, keeping his voice low. I don't want to hear that garbage again. He didn't give her space to process it. Grabbing her by the wrist, he pulled her up off the bench. I stumbled slightly, her boots scraping the linoleum, before her back hit the solid metal of the vending machine. Ren stepped directly into her space, caging her in. He leaned down, stopping when their lips were just inches apart. I stared up at him. The skin of her cheek was still flushed pink from the slap. Her dark eyes were glassy, the raw, overwhelmed frustration pushing her right to the edge of actually crying. Before the first tear could spill, Rin dropped both hands to her waist, gripped her tightly, and kissed her. She let out a short, startled gasp against his mouth, and he took the opening. His tongue swept past her lips, deepening the kiss immediately. For a split second, she stood frozen against the cold metal. Then she pulled him closer, opening her mouth wider and yielding completely to the heavy, demanding rhythm he set. He took his time, exploring her mouth until her knees started to give out, forcing him to hold her up by her waist. When he finally pulled back, they were both breathing heavily. A thin, silver string of saliva caught between their lips for a second before snapping in the quiet air. Mai stayed pinned against the machine, her chest heaving. The tears hadn't fallen, but her face was a burning, chaotic red. She looked up at him, her brain completely short-circuiting. Rin didn't answer. His hands slid lower, dropping past her hips to grip her securely, giving her a firm squeeze.
Mais je le t'aide.
A sharp, completely undignified squeak slipped out of her. Before she could push him away, he ducked his head, pressing his mouth against the bare curve of her neck. He dragged his teeth lightly over her pulse point, biting down just enough to leave a mark before sucking hard against the skin. Mai let out a shaky breath, her fingers digging desperately into his shoulders to keep her legs from completely giving out. Run pulled back just enough to brush his lips right against her ear. "Consider that my payment, princess," he murmured. "When are you available to pay the next installment?" The flush on her face darkened to an absolute, burning crimson. She shoved both hands hard against his chest, finally managing to push him back half a step. "You," she stammered, genuinely struggling to find her footing. She pointed a finger at his chest, completely flustered. "You just do whatever you want. I can't control you at all. You just keep bullying me." Run just smiled, slipping his hands casually back into his jacket pockets. "I mean it," Mai threatened, crossing her arms tightly as a defense mechanism, though her eyes kept darting back to his mouth. "The second she gets back from Hokkaido, I am telling my sister you treat me like this." "Go ahead," Rin laughed, stepping back to give her space to breathe. "Tell the girl with the heavenly restriction that I squeezed her twin sister's ass in a train station. See how that conversation plays out for both of us." Mai opened her mouth to argue, realized exactly how Maki would react to that information, and snapped her mouth shut. She settled for glaring daggers at the linoleum floor, though she reached up to lightly touch the warm, stinging mark he had just left on her neck. "Come on," Rin said, nodding toward the main corridor. "Let's go get a coffee." They walked out of the service corridor and merged back into the station's heavy foot traffic. Run found a small, busy cafe near the west exit. After grabbing 2 coffees from the counter, he bypassed the open tables in the center and slid into a padded corner booth. Instead of sitting across from him, Mai slid into the booth right next to him. She kept her jacket collar pulled up slightly, her shoulder brushing against his as she took her cup. Their legs pressed together under the table. Mai took a slow sip of her drink, keeping her eyes locked on the plastic lid. The combative energy from the alcove had dialed back into a quiet, hyper-aware shyness. She shifted slightly, clearly hyper-focused on the physical contact but making no effort to move away. Run reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He unlocked it, tapped the camera app and held it up, switching to the front-facing lens so they were both in the frame. Mai frowned, instantly leaning away from the camera. "What are you doing?" "Taking a picture." "Put that away," she muttered, raising a hand to block the lens. "We aren't a couple of junior high kids on a field trip. Taking selfies in the middle of a cafe is childish." "You're just mad because your face is red," he pointed out. "It is not." Run wrapped his arm around her shoulders, ignoring the protest, and pulled her flush against his side. He snapped the first picture. On the screen, Ren was grinning lazily, while Mai was mid-scowl, glaring daggers at the lens with her hand half-raised in a blur. Terrible, Ren noted, swiping to view it. Let's try again. Look like you actually like me this time. I don't, she lied smoothly, staring straight ahead at the sugar packets on the table. Okay, if you don't cooperate, I'm just gonna start kissing your neck again right here next to the pastry display. Mai's eyes darted nervously toward the barista counter and the elderly couple sitting 2 tables over. You wouldn't. Ren just tilted his head and raised an eyebrow. She let out a long, defeated sigh. You are exhausting. He held the phone back up, adjusting the angle. He tapped his own face with his free hand. Right here. Mai rolled her eyes, but she didn't argue. She leaned in, closing the distance between them. As Ren's thumb hit the shutter button, she pressed her lips against his cheek. The screen flashed, capturing the shot perfectly. Her eyes closed, the silver pendant resting against her collarbone, and Ren looking straight at the camera with a satisfied smirk. Before she could pull back to her side of the booth, Ren shifted his grip, catching her around the waist and pulling her slightly off balance onto his lap. She let out a short, surprised laugh, trying to swat the phone out of his hand. Click. He lowered the device and opened the gallery. The third picture was slightly blurry, but it caught the exact moment her guard dropped. Mai wasn't posing or glaring. She was caught mid-laugh, looking up at him with a soft, completely genuine smile. She leaned over his arm to look at the screen, her chin resting near his shoulder. Delete that last one, she murmured. My hair looks terrible. Not a chance, Ren said. He locked the screen and slipped the phone back into his pocket. That one's my new lock screen. Ren pulled his phone back out to check the screen. The bold white numbers read 11:14 a.m. The entire morning had evaporated. He tapped his fingers against the table. I need to get back to Tokyo. If I ditch Nanami for much longer, he's going to actually cleave me in half. Mai nodded, the quiet bubble of the corner booth popping as reality set back in. She grabbed her empty cup and slid out of the booth. They tossed their trash and navigated back to the central concourse. The midday crowds were thicker now, tourists and businessmen swarming the ticketing gates. They walked side by side, skipping the overt physical contact but staying close enough that their shoulders brushed every few steps. Down on the Tokyo-bound platform, the wind whipped past as a bullet train rushed through on the opposite tracks. The electronic departure board blinked, signaling the next Tokyo-bound Shinkansen was 2 minutes out. The heavy rumble of the approaching train vibrated through the concrete platform. The silver cars slid into the station, the brakes hissing loudly as they slowed to a halt. Ren turned to her. Use the necklace if you need it. Don't hoard the energy just to be stubborn. Mai didn't pull her hands out of her pockets, but she subtly pressed her forearm against her chest, right over where the metal pendant rested beneath her shirt. The faint, steady hum of the stored energy answered her. I'll figure it out, she said. She looked up at him, keeping her voice casual. Try not to get killed in Tokyo. Maki would never let me hear the end of it if you died. I'll do my best to avoid it. The automated boarding chime echoed over the platform speakers. The doors slid open behind him. Ren stepped backward onto the train. He didn't pull her in for another kiss, just gave her a lazy, 2-finger salute. Mai rolled her eyes, but a genuine smile slipped through. She stayed rooted on the platform, watching him until the doors sealed shut. As the train accelerated out of Kyoto Station, pulling him back toward the ticking clock of Halloween, he watched her figure shrink and vanish into the crowd. The vending machine swallowed the coins with a heavy clank. A cold can of black coffee dropped into the metal tray. Megumi bent down, grabbed it, and tossed it over his shoulder without looking. Yuji caught it easily, already holding 2 sodas of his own. I still think we should have checked the station bathrooms, Yuji said, popping the tab on his cola. What if he passed out in there? I still think we should have checked the station bathrooms, Yuji said, popping the tab on his cola. What if he passed out in there? Nobara swung her hammer, embedding the head deep into a nearby wooden training post. If he died on a public toilet, he deserved it. A few feet away, Nanami adjusted the cuff of his tan suit. He didn't look at the students. He just stared at the face of his wristwatch. The second hand ticked past the 12. The sweeping operation in Shibuya is complete, Nanami announced. His voice was completely flat, devoid of any leftover energy. The low-grade curses have been cleared from the metro lines. As of this exact moment, I am officially off the clock. Nanami-san, wait, Yuji started. What about tomorrow? If it does not directly threaten the immediate survival of Tokyo, do not tell me, Nanami interrupted. He turned his back to them, already walking toward the campus exit. I am going home. I am going to drink a very large glass of wine. Good evening. They watched the blonde sorcerer disappear down the stone path. Yuji took a long drink of his soda. He looks really tired. We spent 4 hours walking through underground subway tunnels squashing flyheads, Megumi muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. Everyone is tired. Nobara yanked her hammer out of the wood. I'm not tired.
I'm pissed.
She hoisted her bag over her shoulder and started marching toward the dorms. The neon glow of Shinjuku bled into the damp alleyway, but the shadows here were thick enough to hide the rot. It was 11:15 p.m., 45 minutes until Halloween. A grade 2 curse dropped from the rusted iron grating. It looked like a swollen, multi-limbed centipede made of human hands, its jaws snapping wildly as it lunged straight for his head. Ren swung the katana upward in a single, fluid arc. The silver edge caught the street lamp's glow, flashing with a blinding white spark. The steel bit into the curse's bone-like armor. A deafening, electric crack split the alley as positive energy detonated on impact. The centipede's front half vaporized instantly, exploding into a violent cloud of white ash and purple static. The remaining mass of writhing human hands slammed blindly into the brick wall, crumbling into fine dust before it even hit the pavement. Ren flicked the dry blade to the side out of pure reflex. Not bad, he murmured. The metal hummed in his grip, volatile and warm. One touch, total erasure. He slid the katana into its scabbard. The guard clicked into place, echoing off the damp brick. Stepping over the scattered ash, he kept walking. The kills tonight were just a way to kill time. He vaulted a rusted chain-link fence, dropping silently onto the tar paper roof of a commercial low-rise. 2 miles south, the towering skyscrapers of Shibuya painted the overcast sky in a hazy, electric blue. The air in front of him rippled. A translucent blue interface snapped into existence, hovering sharply against the backdrop of the Tokyo skyline. Achievement unlocked, milestone reached. 500 cursed spirits eradicated. Session tracker, 400 plus targets eliminated since 1400 hours. Rewards dispensed. Hundreds of miles away, deep beneath the frozen forests of Hokkaido, the pale blue light of the underground corridor had stopped being atmospheric about 6 hours ago. Now it was just giving Maki a massive headache. Am I walking in a damn circle? Maki muttered, her voice echoing flatly down the endless granite hallway. She stopped, resting the butt of her wooden naginata against the floor. She had been walking steadily since the afternoon. According to her internal clock, it had to be creeping close to midnight. The corridor hadn't changed. The same seamless stone, the same faint blue glow bleeding from the masonry, the same thick layer of ancient dust. I swear to God, she whispered into the quiet tomb, if I'm trapped in a spatial loop. She stepped closer to the right-hand wall. About an hour ago, Out of pure paranoia, she had dragged the blade of her naginata hard across the stone to leave a marker. She brushed a layer of fresh dust away from the granite. There it was, a deep, jagged silver scratch etched right into the rock at eye level. Maki stared at her own trail marker. She let out a slow, deeply irritated breath. Her white breath plumed in the freezing, stale air. Unbelievable. It's a barrier maze. She leaned her head back against the cold stone, staring up at the vaulted ceiling. Because her cursed energy had completely vanished, drained to absolute zero, she couldn't sense the subtle shifts in the barrier's walls. The tomb was silently folding space around her, guiding her in an endless, looping circle to keep intruders away from the center. Under normal circumstances, a sorcerer without the ability to read cursed energy would die down here, slowly starving to death in an infinite loop. Maki lowered her head. A dark, dangerous grin slowly pulled at the corners of her mouth. "Well," she said, taking a step back into the center of the hallway. "Good thing I don't play by your rules anymore." She spun the naginata in her hands, taking a wide, grounded stance. If the hallway was designed to loop forever, then the only way forward was to stop using the hallway. Maki tightened her grip, her knuckles popping in the quiet air. Twisting her hips, she swung the heavy wooden polearm like a baseball bat directly into the seamless granite wall. Boom! The air in front of him rippled. A translucent blue interface snapped into existence, hovering sharply against the backdrop of the Tokyo skyline. Achievement unlocked, milestone reached. 500 cursed spirits eradicated. Session tracker, 400 plus targets eliminated since 1400 hours. Rewards dispensed, plus 20,000 system points, milestone base payout, plus 5,000 system points, hidden condition, session grinder, system balance update, previous balance, 20,000 SP, current balance, 45,000 SP. Run let out a slow breath, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. 45,000 points gave him breathing room. It wasn't enough to buy another special grade weapon modification, but it was enough to keep him alive in an emergency.
Maizenin.
Status: upgrading from 1-star to 3-star efficiency. Ren blinked, standing up straighter. "Show me the conversion metrics," he muttered. The screen shifted, displaying a clean, clinical breakdown of his cursed energy economy. Technique optimization report. Construction. Previous state 1-star efficiency. Status: critical energy bleed. Mechanic. Without natural affinity, the user's body wasted 90% of channeled energy as ambient heat and friction during the creation of matter. Cost example. Constructing a standard 9mm lead bullet required 500 CE units. Constructing a complex object, e.g., a steel combat knife, required 15,000 CE units. Current state 3-star efficiency. Status: stabilized conversion rate. Mechanic. The system has bypassed the user's lack of innate talent, streamlining the molecular assembly process to mimic a Grade 2 sorcerer's natural output. Cost example. Constructing a standard 9mm lead bullet now requires 50 CE units. Constructing a complex object, e.g., a steel combat knife or a flashbang, now requires 2,000 CE units. Ren stared at the numbers, running the math in his head. 50 units for a bullet, 2,000 for a flashbang. The technique was finally practical. He didn't have to treat it like a suicide button anymore. He held out his left hand. Let's see. He pictured a standard 9mm hollow point. He didn't force the energy, just let the newly optimized system handle the molecular heavy lifting. A faint spark of blue energy snapped over his palm, and a cold brass casing dropped into his bare hand. Run rolled it between his fingers. The weight was perfect. No heat bleed.
No friction burns.
Just cold, hard ammunition. He flicked his thumb, tossing the bullet off the roof into the dark alley below. Yeah, that works. He dismissed the interface. The blue panels shattered into dust and faded into the damp Tokyo air. He checked his phone. 11:58 p.m. 2 minutes to Halloween. Run walked to the edge of the tar paper roof. He stepped off the ledge, dropping into the alley below. October 31st. 1:15 p.m. The sun was bright, the autumn air was crisp, and the outdoor terrace of the Shibuya Cafe was packed. Ren sat at a small iron table near the railing, nursing an iced Americano. He was dressed in the full Tokyo Jiu-Jitsu high uniform. The stark, pitch-black tunic, matching tailored trousers, and the distinctive gold swirl button resting at his collarbone. With Nightfall's scabbard sealed safely away in his inventory, he sat comfortably, leaning back in the iron chair. To the rest, the voice was persistent, accompanied by the clinking of cheap jewelry and a heavy wave of floral perfume. He finally looked up. 2 girls, probably university age, were hovering right at the edge of his table. The one talking was leaning in, casually playing with the end of her hair, her smartphone already unlocked in her other hand. Her friend stood a half step back, blushing furiously and refusing to make eye contact. "We saw you sitting by yourself," the first girl said, offering a practiced, highly confident smile. "Are you waiting for someone? We're heading to a Halloween party later in Roppongi. You should come." Ren took a slow sip of his coffee. The ice rattled against the plastic cup. "I'm busy tonight. It starts late. We can just exchange lines for now." She held her phone out across the table. "No thanks." She blinked. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she doubled down, leaning a little closer. "Come on, don't be boring. Do you have a girlfriend or something?" "Ido." Ren dropped the last trace of polite customer service warmth. His expression deadened into a cold, flat stare, his eyes turning so sharp and hollow that the temperature around the table seemed to physically drop. The girl's confident smile shattered. Her breath hitched, basic survival instincts suddenly overriding the system's charm. She quickly pocketed her phone, taking a hurried step back. "Right, weirdo," she muttered, though her voice shook slightly. She grabbed her friend's arm and hastily steered them both into the crowded crosswalk, not looking back once. Ren sighed, slumping back against the iron chair. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Can't even drink coffee in peace," he muttered to his iced Americano. The system's passive charm trait was exhausting. "I'm going to get assassinated by a jealous boyfriend before the curses even make their move. It is a terrible burden, being so highly in demand. It is a terrible burden, being so highly in demand." The voice came from right behind him, smooth, amused, and a little bit erotic. Ren just took another slow sip of his coffee as a tall woman stepped gracefully around his table. She slid into the empty iron chair opposite him, crossing her long legs. Her pale blue hair was woven into thick braids, one draped casually down the front of her face. She looked completely at ease, blending seamlessly into the sunny terrace despite the heavy, predatory aura she carried. Mei rested her chin on her hand, her visible eye locking onto his. "Though I suppose Satoru's mysterious new transfer student is bound to turn a few heads," she added, her lips curling into a knowing smile. "I was wondering who was cleaning up all the trash in Shinjuku last night." "You've been busy. Just killing time," Ren said casually, not missing a beat. He kept swirling the ice in his cup. "Are you making a habit of stalking high schoolers, Mei? Or am I just special?" She smiled, the kind of expression that didn't quite reach her visible eye. "I don't stalk. I just happen to keep a close watch on high-value assets." "Asset?" Ren set his cup down. "That's a nice way of saying you're sizing up my wallet. What are you doing here? What do you actually want?" Mei tilted her head, the heavy blue braid shifting against her shoulder. I told you back at the dorms.
I'm curious.
Satoru drops a boy with zero background into the lineup and suddenly gets an unregistered special grade weapon. Then, that same boy clears out half the trash in Shinjuku before midnight. She reached across the small table, her manicured finger lightly tapping the plastic rim of his cup. I like investments that yield high returns. You look like a very high return. Ren let his eyes drop to her hand, then back to her face. He didn't pull away. Instead, he leaned forward, cutting the distance over the small iron table in half. Curiosity is an expensive habit, he said.
I'm aware.
Her voice dropped a fraction, the polite, mercenary edge giving way to something a little more genuine. I have a lot of capital. Then you should know better than to buy in without seeing the product. Ren rested his forearms on the table, matching her relaxed posture. You're following me around on a Saturday afternoon because you think I'm hiding something that can make you a lot of money, or keep you alive. Maybe both. And? She prompted. And, Ren said, offering a faint, lazy smile. You're trying to figure out if you need to bill me, or if I'm going to be the one billing you. Mei actually laughed at that. A short, clear sound that cut through the background chatter of the crowded terrace. She leaned back in her chair, looking at him with a new, sharper layer of interest. You're bold for a student, she noted.
I'm practical.
If we're going to be doing business or whatever this is, you should probably know I don't give discounts. Not even for pretty faces. A shame. Mei sighed, though she looked thoroughly entertained. She picked up the spare napkin on the table, retrieved a silver pen from her pocket, and quickly scrawled a string of numbers across the paper. She slid it across the iron table. I suppose I'll just have to earn my keep then, my personal line, for when you decide what your rates are. Ren picked up the napkin, folding it once and slipping it into his pocket without looking at it. I'll keep it in mind. Do. She stood up, smoothing the front of her clothes. Enjoy your coffee, Ren. Something tells me the rest of your Halloween is going to be rather loud. Mei blended into the shifting mass of costumes, her pale hair disappearing behind a group of tourists. Ren didn't stick around to watch. Shibuya was already choking on foot traffic. People bumped shoulder to shoulder, trailing fake blood and dragging plastic scythes. Ren kept his hands in his pockets, navigating the crush with tight, efficient movements. A guy in a cheap Dracula cape clipped his shoulder, sloshing half a beer onto the pavement. Hey, asshole. Ren didn't break his stride. He stepped off the curb, leaving the guy shouting at his back, and hooked a sharp right into a service alley off-center guy. The brick walls cut the roar of the crossing down to a dull hum. A chain delivery gate blocked the path. Ren vaulted it without breaking momentum, his boots hitting the asphalt silently. He pulled his phone from his pocket. 1:42 p.m. Kyoto baked in the afternoon sun. On the mattress, Mai's phone buzzed. She didn't look. It was probably Yudaheim nagging about morning drills, or Miwa hunting for a lunch buddy. She kept rolling a brass casing between her fingers. The phone buzzed again. She reached over and flipped the screen. Maki. The casing slipped, clattering against the floorboards. Mai stared at the glowing name. Third ring. If it went to voicemail, Maki would just call Yudaheim. Or worse, she'd hitchhike down from Hokkaido and kick the dorm door off its hinges. Fourth ring. Mai snatched it, hitting accept. Yeah? What? A faint crackle of static and muffled background noise echoed through the receiver. You're okay, Maki breathed out. The sharp relief in her voice was impossible to miss. Mai gripped the phone. Why wouldn't I be? Don't play dumb. Are you hurt? Mai touched the heavy metal pendant resting at her collarbone. Harem. She wasn't hurt. She actually had a massive reserve of cursed energy wired directly to her soul right now. I'm fine, she said. You sound weird. Where are you? My dorm. Did something happen in Kyoto? No, it happened in a Tokyo hotel. Mai pressed her palm to her forehead. She could perfectly picture Maki standing in a blizzard, gripping her phone. Maki knew the rules she'd given Ren for his survival. Knowing them and hearing the details, though, were different things. Hey Maki, while you were looking for a sword in a ditch, I was in your boyfriend's bed. We're dating now. Maki was going to kill him, then her. Meh. The older sister tone crept into the static. Talk to me. Who did you fight? Nobody.
My setup.
I didn't fight anyone. I'm literally sitting on my bed. Then why did I feel it? Maki's voice cut through the static, sharp and demanding. A complete bottom out. You don't just drop to zero sitting in your dorm. Mai tightened her grip on the phone. I wasn't in my dorm all weekend. Where were you? Tokyo. Pause on the line. Maki let out a slow, steady breath. Tokyo, Maki repeated. Her tone dropped a dangerous octave. You hate Tokyo. Yudaheim said you were visiting family. Did you go see the old man?
No. Gross? No.
I had plans. In Shibuya. With who? Just a friend. You don't have friends in Tokyo, Mai. Yes, I do. Kind of. Give me a name. Mai squeezed her eyes shut. She pulled her knees to her chest, making herself smaller on the mattress. She could lie. She should lie. But Maki's tone was the exact same one she used when they were kids, and Mai tried to hide a broken vase. It bypassed every defensive wall she had. Meh. Run, she squeaked out. The silence on the Hokkaido end of the line was absolute.
Rein, Maki echoed.
It didn't sound like a question. He invited me out. Mai hurried to explain, her words tumbling over each other, to make up for the Goodwill event. We just got coffee and walked around. You lost your cursed energy getting coffee.
No.
I swallowed hard. Her face felt like it was on fire.
He stayed over.
At his hotel. Another brutal silence. You stayed at his hotel. He slept on the couch the first night.
Mais yelled defensively.
The first night. Mai bit her lip hard enough to taste copper. She had walked right into that one. Maki was dissecting her sentences like a forensic analyst. Maki, please don't be mad. You told him, you gave him the rule, the survival pass thing. He told me about it. And it's not like that. He said he's marrying you. He made that very clear. Mai was practically begging now, her usual prickly pride completely vaporized. I like him. And yeah, you slept with him. Yes? Mai whispered, shrinking down until her forehead rested on her knees. She braced for the explosion, the yelling, the inevitable threat of a naginata to the throat. Maki exhaled, a long, heavy breath that crackled through the phone speaker. Are you hurt? Maki asked. I already told you no. Not from fighting. From him. He doesn't know his own strength sometimes. Mai blinked, the sheer practicality of the question short-circuiting her panic. No. He was careful. Maki groaned, a visceral sound of utter exasperation. I'm going to kill him. I'm going to actually murder him. I leave for 3 days and he hooks up with my sister. Maki! And then I'm going to kill you, Maki added, though the lethal edge was gone. She just sounded incredibly tired. Are you really okay? Energy-wise? Yeah, Mai said softly. I'm really okay. The line fell quiet, save for a faint, chaotic burst of audio playing somewhere in the background of Maki's receiver. The interrogation was over. Mai stared down at her lap, unable to just let him take the fall. Maki, seriously? Mai blurted out, her fingernails biting into her own palm to force the words past her lips before she lost her nerve. Don't be mad at him. It wasn't his fault. Only a tense, Heavy silence answered her over the speaker. I squeezed her eyes shut, pushing through it. I was the one who called him. I made him come to Tokyo. I invited him to the hotel. It was mostly true, and right now, swallowing her own pride was a cheap price to pay if it kept her sister from bisecting Ren with a polearm. He actually tried to leave, and I didn't let him. So if you're going to be pissed at me. I know, idiot, Maki said. Her voice lacked its usual bite, sounding more resigned than anything else. I opened her eyes. You do. I know him, Maki said, the static crackling as she shifted the phone. Ren wouldn't have laid a hand on you unless you explicitly pushed for it. He's way too paranoid about me gutting him in his sleep. Plus, you're too stubborn to let a guy call the shots anyway. Mai opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. Her face heated up again, but the crushing weight on her chest finally evaporated. Maki wasn't going to disown her. Maki wasn't going to kill Rin. So we're good, Mai asked tentatively. We're fine, Maki grumbled. But I'm still making him run laps until he throws up when I get back. It's the principle of the thing. Mai let out a short, breathless laugh, slumping back against the headboard, the tension completely drained out of her muscles. She stared up at the ceiling of her dorm room, listening to the faint hiss of the connection. How are you? Mai asked, her voice dropping to a softer, normal register. Actually, a loud, resounding crack echoed through the speaker, followed by the sound of crumbling stone. I pulled the phone back slightly. Was that a rock? No, Maki replied, her voice completely deadpan, though the howling wind over the receiver had noticeably muffled. Just noise from the TV. Some kid is watching anime in the other room. Mai narrowed her eyes at the screen of her phone. Anime? Right. In the middle of a Hokkaido blizzard. It's a very loud anime, Maki insisted smoothly. She let out a long sigh, the sound crackling through the line. Look, you remember the intel I got? The whole reason I came out to this freezing wasteland to retrieve that lost Zenin curse tool. Yeah, Mai said, sitting up and crossing her legs on the mattress. Did you actually find the barrier? Found it. Got stuck in it? Maki grumbled, sounding more annoyed than traumatized. I spent hours walking in circles inside this massive, ridiculous stone maze. But right after my heavenly pact completed, the barrier's rules stopped registering my existence completely. I just walked right through the boundary line. It practically spit me out near this random little mountain town. Me blanked. Wait, so you're in a town? I thought you were calling me from a snowbank. Close to it, Maki admitted. I managed to find a small house on the edge of town. Some sweet old woman let me in to warm up and let me plug my charger into the wall. That's the only reason I have enough battery and signal to call your idiot self. Mai ignored the insult, a genuine heavy wave of relief washing over her. She picked up the brass casing she had dropped earlier, rolling it between her fingers. So, did you find it? The sword. A long pause hung on the line. When Maki finally spoke, her voice carried a strange, heavy confidence. A quiet, absolute kind of power that Mai hadn't heard from her twin in... I found something even better, to be honest, Maki said softly. Mai's curiosity spiked, her defensive posture completely forgotten. What? Is it a special grade? What did you get? I'll tell you when I get back. Maki deflected, the faint hint of a smirk audible in her voice. You suck, Mai groaned, flopping backward onto her mattress and staring at the ceiling. When are you getting back to Tokyo? Depends on the train schedules. The storm is messing with the tracks, Maki replied, accompanied by the faint rustle of heavy fabric, as if she were strapping her gear back on. But coming back from here will likely take me about 12 hours. Maybe less if I can catch an express connection down the mountain. Tell Ren he has exactly that long to write his will. I let out a short, genuine laugh. I'll pass on the message. Be safe. Click. The screen went black. In the quiet, drafty living room of the Hokkaido mountain house, Maki set the phone down on a small wooden table, leaving it plugged into the frayed charging cable. For a long moment, she just stood there. Then, she dragged both hands down her face with a loud, exasperated groan, pressing the heels of her palms into her eyes. Unbelievable, she muttered to the empty room. Out of every female sorcerer in Japan, Nobara, some random Kyoto student, hell, even Yutaheim would have been less of a headache. But no, her own twin sister. Maki dropped her hands, feeling a migraine building right behind her eyes. The worst part was knowing Mai wasn't lying. Mai had actually been the one to drag him to that hotel and initiate the whole thing. Maki crossed her arms, glaring out the frosted window at the falling snow as if it had personally offended her. I'm going to have to discipline her when I get back, Maki grumbled under her breath. She leaned her forehead against the freezing glass. She and her twin sister dating the exact same guy. It was like the plot of a trashy late-night soap opera. Maki violently shook her head, rattling the absurd reality out of her brain. Whatever, she muttered, pushing herself away from the window. The relationship logistics could wait until Tokyo. Maki stared down at her open hands, slowly flexing the fingers. The old calluses and training scars hadn't changed a bit, but clenching her right hand into a fist made the leather of her glove groan, stretching taut over knuckles that felt entirely different. Pressing a thumb against the edge of the wooden table resulted in a sharp crack. Solid oak splintered outward like a dry twig under the casual weight. Ridiculous, Maki muttered, letting out a short breath. Back in Tokyo Jujutsu High. So let me get this straight, Nobara said, her boots crunching sharply against the dirt path winding through the Jujutsu High campus. She didn't look at him, keeping her eyes fixed ahead, but the way she swung her hammer by its leather loop was a clear warning. Your absolute ideal woman is someone who can put you in a body bag, but leaves you in a t-shirt instead? Ren kept his hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets, matching her steady stride. I said what I said. It's a matter of efficiency. Saves on the wardrobe budget. You're disgusting, she muttered, though there wasn't any real heat in it. She threw her head back, letting out a short, dramatic sigh that cut through the crisp autumn air. Honestly, I thought Satoru brought in someone with actual taste for once. You worked at a high-end vintage streetwear boutique. I thought we could finally talk about winter coats. Instead, you're just another brain-dead jock with a weirdly specific survival instinct. Hey, I saved you from Panda's lecture on upper body aerodynamics, Ren pointed out, offering a faint, lazy grin. You should be thanking me. I'd rather swallow my own nails, Nobara scoffed. She stopped walking, turning to face him. She planted a hand on her hip and pointed the wooden handle of her hammer directly at his chest. Look at me, she demanded, her voice dropping into a deadpan, authoritative register. I need to know for the record, are you a generic, mouth-breathing pervert like those two? Or do you actually have standards? Because if you're just another creep, I am going to personally rearrange your surprisingly symmetrical face. Ren stopped, looking down at the hammer pointed at him, then up at Nobara's intensely serious expression. He thought about Maki out in the freezing snow, effortlessly shattering solid oak. He thought about Mai's sharp, defensive pride melting away in a Tokyo hotel room. Ren didn't even blink. I already told you my standards, Kujisaki. I like women who can kill me. Nobara stared at him for a solid 3 seconds. She searched his face for a punchline, a smirk, or any sign that he was joking. When she found absolutely nothing but flat, deadpan honesty, she slowly lowered the hammer. You're not joking, she realized, her face twisting into a mix of mild horror and profound judgment. Dead serious. You need psychiatric help. Probably, Rin agreed casually, starting to walk again. Nobara stopped dead in her tracks, pivoting on her heel. She stepped directly into his space, grabbing the dark fabric of his jacket and yanking him to a halt.
No.
Stop. That's a cop-out, she snapped, glaring up at him. What does... I asked you a simple question. Boobs or ass? Tell me clearly right now, or I'll prove I can kill you too. Rin didn't flinch. He just looked down at her white-knuckled grip on his uniform, then met her furious gaze. A slow, teasing smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. Why are you so interested in knowing, he muttered. Taking notes for yourself? Nobara's eye visibly twitched. I am trying to accurately categorize your level of degeneracy, she hissed. Answer the question before I use resonance on your shadow. Rin sighed, letting his shoulders drop in exaggerated defeat. Fine, you want the anatomical... Her brain visibly stalled, trying to process the sheer, suicidal audacity of the sentence that had just left his mouth. Maki, Nobara repeated, her voice suddenly devoid of all emotion. Our senior, Maki Zenin, the one with the naginata who kicks holes in concrete. That's the one, Rin said cheerfully. Nobara stared at him. She looked left toward the dorms, right toward the training fields, and then back at Rin, fully expecting Maki to materialize out of thin air and decapitate him on the spot. You're a dead man, she whispered, taking a slow step back as if his stupidity were contagious. If she hears you say that, Satoru won't even be able to find your teeth. Good thing she's in Hokkaido, then, Rin grinned, stepping around her and continuing down the dirt path. Like I said, Kujisaki. I like women who can kill me. Nobara stood frozen on the path for another 5 seconds, staring at his back. She gripped her hammer tightly, shaking her head. Absolute psycho, she muttered to herself, finally jogging to catch up. Nobara matched his pace, though she kept a cautious 3 feet of distance between them, fully acting as if his death wish might spontaneously explode and take her out with it. They walked in silence for a solid minute. The gravel crunched under their boots. Despite her best efforts, her brain absolutely refused to drop the conversation. Maki's, Nobara frowned. Without thinking, she subtly brushed her hand against her own waist, smoothing down the dark fabric of her uniform skirt. She was in great shape. She swung a heavy hammer daily, ran drills, and took care of herself. But Maki was a literal biological anomaly. Nobara's gaze flicked downward for a fraction of a second, mentally weighing her own assets against the senior's surprisingly generous proportions that usually hid under layers of tactical gear. Wait, Nobara stopped walking. What the actual hell am I doing? Why was she comparing herself to Maki based on the idiotic standards of a Harajuku retail worker? She slapped both hands against her own cheeks with a loud, sharp smack. Rin paused, glancing back over his shoulder. He raised an eyebrow at the red handprints rapidly forming on her face. You good, Kujisaki? Was there a mosquito? Shut up, Nobara barked. Her pride flared up instantly, her face burning with aggressive, entirely unwarranted embarrassment. She pointed an accusing finger at him. You infect people with your stupid, degenerate brainwaves. Stay away from me. Rin just looked at her. I literally just answered the question you forced me to answer. I don't care. I'm going shopping, she announced loudly, pivoting on her heel and marching in the exact opposite direction toward the main campus gates. I need to look at imported leather to cleanse my soul of this entire conversation. Don't call me. Don't text me. And definitely don't die before you pay me back for my coffee. Rin watched her storm off, her hammer swinging wildly at her side. He let out a quiet laugh, but once her silhouette shrank toward the main gates and she was fully out of earshot, the teasing smirk dropped completely from his face. It was instantly replaced by a cold, flat calculation that he pulled his phone from his pocket and tapped the screen. 5 p.m. The sun was already starting to dip behind the Tokyo skyline, casting long, sharp shadows across the campus courtyard. If his memory of the timeline held up, Kenjaku would drop the first curtain over the Shibuya crossing sometime between 7 o'clock and 8 p.m. He had 2, maybe 3 hours left. Ren turned on his heel and headed straight for his dorm. It was time for a final inventory check. He needed to recheck all his preps. As he walked up the concrete stairs to his floor, his mind ran through the logistics of the night. The temptation to just walk up to Gojo right now and tell him everything, Kenjaku, the prison realm, the disaster curse's ambush, was always there in the back of his mind. But he crushed the thought instantly. Saving Gojo tonight was entirely out of the question. If he stopped he knew exactly where the enemies would be, who they would target, and how they fought. If he altered the core anchor of the timeline, he would be flying completely blind into a war zone. Ren pushed his dorm door closed, throwing the deadbolt with a sharp clack. In the pitch-black room, a holographic blue window flickered to life, casting harsh, sterile light across his face. The scramble crossing outside Shibuya Station was a suffocating sea of bodies. Plastic devil horns, cheap synthetic wigs, and heavy coats pressed shoulder to shoulder under the blinding neon glare of the billboards. The noise was a physical weight, thousands of overlapping conversations, the blare of traffic horns, and the endless loop of idle pop music blasting from the front building. The digital clock on the massive screen flipped. 6:59 p.m. "I literally can't move," a girl in a blood-splattered nurse costume yelled into her phone, covering her other ear to drown out the noise. She stood near the edge of the Tokyo department store, standing on her tiptoes. "No, I'm by the subway entrance. Just stay at center, guy. I'll try to push through." She lowered her phone, letting out a frustrated breath. She bumped shoulders with a salaryman in a rumpled suit, muttered a quick apology, and took a step toward the crosswalk. The digital clock flipped again. The massive dome silently slammed into the asphalt, completely enclosing a 400-meter radius around the station. The overlapping roar of the crowd faltered. The girl in the nurse costume stopped walking, looking up. The neon lights from the billboards were still flashing, but the light didn't reach the sky anymore. It just reflected off the pitch-black ceiling that now hung over the city. "What is that?" someone muttered nearby. "Is it a drone show? Did the power go out in the next block?" A guy in a cheap Dracula cape, holding a half-empty beer, tried to walk down the street leading away from the station. He took 2 steps and suddenly jerked backward, his face smacking into something completely invisible. His beer slipped, shattering on the pavement. "What the hell?" He reached out, his hands flattening against thin air. There was no glass, no wall, just a solid, unyielding force blocking the street. People on the other side of the invisible line stopped, staring at him. A group of teenagers dressed as zombies laughed, thinking it was a mime routine. One of them stepped forward, walking right past the Dracula guy and into the station plaza without any issue. But when the Dracula guy tried to step back out, he hit the invisible wall again. "Hey!" the guy yelled, slapping his palms against the empty air. "Hey, it won't let me out. There's a wall here." The girl in the nurse costume pulled out her phone to take a video. The screen lit up, but her thumb froze over the record button. No service. She blinked, tapping the screen. Nothing. She looked around. Dozens of people were doing the exact same thing, holding their phones up to the sky, shaking them, tapping screens with rising frustration. "I don't have a signal. Wi-Fi is dead too. Hey, why can't we leave?" The system's blue light cast sterile shadows across Ren's dorm room. Fully dressed in his uniform, he sat on the mattress, swiping glowing interface squares aside. He stopped twirling Nightfall, letting its tip rest against the floor, and checked his phone. 7:07 p.m. The device vibrated violently in his palm.
Iki. Ren answered. Ren.
Thank goodness you picked up, Ichichi said. His voice strained over a backdrop of sirens. 7 minutes ago, a curtain was lowered over the station plaza. An unverified number of civilians are trapped inside. Standard cell service and radio inside the radius are completely dead. Let me guess, nobody can get out. Correct. It's a localized barrier explicitly preventing civilian exit. The higher-ups are scrambling everyone. Nanami's squad is already mobilizing. I am dispatching a black sedan to the campus gates right now. All right, Brent said. I'll be at the gates in 2 minutes. The line went dead. Ren pocketed the phone and dismissed Nightfall into his inventory. He walked out, pulling the heavy door shut until the deadbolt clicked into place. The black sedan jerked to a halt near the Dojinzaka police barricades at 8:09 p.m. Ren pushed the door open, his boots hitting the asphalt. Above the panicked street, a massive curtain swallowed the skyline, plunging the skyscrapers into an artificial night. Ichichi stood by a cruiser's flashing lights, typing rapidly on a tablet. Beside him, Nanami checked his pocket watch, the sharp lines of his suit catching the harsh glare. Ino and Fushiguro waited a few paces back, their attention locked on the black dome. Nanami turned as Ren approached. His gaze swept over the teenager, pausing. You are projecting a different vibe today, Ren, Nanami stated. It wasn't a question. Ren held his ground, forcing his breathing to remain even. Didn't get much sleep, Ren deflected. What's the situation? They broadcasted a single condition to the people trapped inside. The civilians won't be released until Gojo arrives. Nanami adjusted his goggles, turning back to the curtain. We are on strictly enforced standby. Multiple squads are positioned outside. Our sole objective is to eliminate anything that slips past Gojo once he initiates his infiltration. Ren gave a short, tight nod. At the extreme edge of his vision, a translucent gold timer pulsed faintly against the dark backdrop of the street. The final threshold dropping his cursed energy to absolute zero could finalize in the very next second, or it could trigger right as he was dodging a lethal blow. So, we know it's a trap, Ren said, his voice flat. He shoved his hands deep into his uniform pockets, looking at Nanami. They lock thousands of civilians in a cage and specifically demand the strongest guy on the planet. Why are the higher-ups actually giving them exactly what they asked for? What's the strategic value in walking right into it? Nanami didn't look away from the towering black dome. The blue and red strobes of the police cruisers reflected sharply off his opaque goggles. Because it is Satoru Gojo, Nanami stated. His tone carried a heavy, cynical resignation. The higher-ups operate on a blunt logic. To them, whatever elaborate snare the enemy has prepared inside that curtain is ultimately irrelevant. They believe he will simply overpower the trap. Ino adjusted his ski mask, leaning forward slightly. It's also about... Exactly, Fushiguro muttered. His eyes narrowed at the barrier. They want Gojo because they know he's the only one who can threaten them. But they don't realize he's essentially a natural disaster himself. Rin stared at the impenetrable black ink of the veil, feeling the cold autumn air bite at his face. They're right, Rin thought, and that is exactly what Kenjaku is counting on. The enemy wasn't trying to overpower Gojo. They were using his overwhelming strength and the very presence of those trapped civilians to lock him into a psychological corner. Understood, Rin finally said. October 31st, 8:31 p.m., outside Shibuya Mark City entrance. Nobara Kujisaki stood with her arms crossed tightly over her chest, glaring at the massive, impenetrable black curtain that had swallowed Shibuya Station. Gulp, gulp, awe. The loud, obnoxious sound of liquid being swallowed made her eye twitch. Nobara slowly turned her head. Sitting on a concrete planter just a few feet away was Nabito Zenin, the head of the Zenin clan. He was dressed in a traditional yukata, completely ignoring the apocalyptic scenario unfolding in front of them in favor of tipping a massive, brown ceramic gourd into his mouth. Alcohol spilled into his white mustache, and he wiped it away with the back of his sleeve, letting out a satisfied, drunken sigh. "Are you entirely serious right now?" Nobara demanded, her voice dripping with venom. "Thousands of people are trapped in Veal, and you're getting plastered on the sidewalk?" Nabito didn't even look at her. He just swirled the gourd, listening to the slosh of the liquor. "Patience, little girl. The higher-ups already made their call. We're on standby. What good is standing at attention going to do when Satoru Gojo is the only one allowed inside the toy box?" Nobara gripped the handle of her hammer so tightly her knuckles popped. "Excuse me. Please listen up, you two." Akari Nitta, their assigned auxiliary manager, came jogging up to them. The blonde woman in the black suit looked like she was on the verge of a stress-induced ulcer. She clutched a glowing tablet to her chest, her eyes darting nervously between the imposing black veil and the heavily intoxicated clan head. "We just received the updated parameters from Ajichi-san," Nitta said, her voice slightly breathless. "The veil is a highly specialized barrier. Civilians can enter, but they cannot leave. Furthermore, it completely severs all radio waves and cellular signals. Once you cross the threshold, you will have absolutely zero communication with the outside world. So we go in blind," Nobara summarized, her tactical brain immediately pushing past her annoyance. "What's the play? Do we breach and establish a comms relay?"
No.
"Absolutely not." Nitu shook her head frantically. "Satoru Gojo has just entered the station alone. Our strict orders are to remain outside the perimeter. We are the net. If any curses or curse users attempt to escape the barrier while Gojo is clearing the subway lines, we exterminate them here." Nabito let out a raspy, dismissive laugh. "Escape? Bah. If the Six Eyes is cutting loose down there won't be anything left to escape except ashes. Wake me up if a special grade manages to crawl out of the gutter." He tipped the gourd back again, closing his eyes and completely tuning them both out. Nobara stared at him, her mouth opening in sheer disbelief. She looked at Nitta, who just offered a weak, helpless smile and a slight bow of apology. October 31st, 8:40 p.m., Meiji Jingumi Station, B2F. The concrete wall buckled inward with a deafening crack, spiderwebs of fractured stone exploding outward in a thick cloud of dust. Yuji Itadori didn't even flinch as a massive, four-armed grasshopper curse skidded across the floor tiles, its chitinous body gouging deep trenches into the station platform. "I am clever," the grasshopper curse clicked, its mandibles snapping together as it forced itself back up to its feet. It crossed its four muscular arms, looking down at the teenager in the Jujutsu High uniform. "You are not clever. I protect the curtain. The clever one protects the curtain." Yuji casually rolled his shoulders, cracking his neck. He had been dispatched alongside Mei Mei and her younger brother Ui to handle the secondary veil covering the adjacent station, making sure Satoru Gojo wouldn't be flanked while he cleared the main Shibuya subway lines alone. Yeah. You've said that like 5 times already." Yuji sighed, dropping his center of gravity into a relaxed but grounded fighting stance. "If you have to keep telling people you're smart, you're probably an idiot." The grasshopper curse let out a screech of pure indignation. Its powerful insectoid legs compressed, and the tiles beneath it shattered as it launched itself forward like a fired cannonball. All 4 fists swung in a rapid, synchronized barrage aimed directly at Yuji's head. It was fast. But to Yuji, whose raw physical specs were already pushing the boundaries of superhuman, The curse's movements were completely readable. Yuji ducked under the first sweeping hook, slipping inside the creature's guard. The curse brought its lower two arms down to crush him, but Yuji pivoted sharply. He drove a devastating left hook directly into the creature's exposed abdomen. The impact sounded like a bomb detonating underground. The grasshopper's eyes bulged as the kinetic force ripped through its armored exoskeleton. Its momentum completely halted, the air violently expelled from its lungs. Before it could even process the pain, Yuji grabbed the creature's upper arm, using his leverage to violently hurl the multi-ton curse over his shoulder. It slammed onto the platform with a sickening crunch. "For arms don't mean much if you don't know how to use them," Yuji muttered. He didn't give the curse a chance to recover. Yuji lunged forward, his fist glowing with the volatile, crackling blue aura of cursed energy. He slammed a divergent fist squarely into the grasshopper's face. The initial blunt force trauma shattered its armor, and a split second later, the delayed secondary impact of cursed energy detonated inside the creature's head. The grasshopper curse shrieked, its body convulsing before rapidly dissolving into a pile of purple ash and residual miasma. Yuji exhaled, shaking the tension from his knuckles. He turned his attention away from the fading ashes and looked toward the center of the platform. Driven deep into the concrete floor was a dark, wooden peg wrapped in heavily inscribed talisman seals, the anchor generating the secondary veil. Yuji walked over, gripping the cursed peg with both hands. He planted his boots, gritted his teeth, and pulled with a massive surge of brute strength. The concrete groaned, and then the peg snapped cleanly in half. Instantly, the oppressive, heavy atmosphere in the underground station vanished. The secondary black curtain that had been choking off the Meiji Jingumi entrances rapidly dissolved into the air, tearing away like burnt paper. Yuji pulled his phone from his pocket. The no-service warning that had been plaguing them inside the radius blinked out, replaced instantly by 3 bars of reception. He hit the speed dial for his auxiliary manager. "Nita-san, it's Itadori," Yuji said the moment the line connected. "The grasshopper curse is exorcised and the physical peg is broken. The veil keeping sorcerers out of Meiji Jingumi is down. I'm heading back up to rendezvous with Mei Mei." The situation outside Shibuya Station was unraveling by the second. Sirens wailed in the distance, cutting through the eerie stillness surrounding the massive black curtain. With new barriers suddenly dropping across the district and horrific reports of civilians being slaughtered inside, the higher-ups had finally pulled the leash off the standby squads. Nanami checked his pocket watch, the harsh glare of a nearby police cruiser reflecting in his opaque goggles. "The parameters have shifted," he told his squad, his voice tight with suppressed frustration. "Civilian rescue is now our primary objective. But these secondary veils are specifically designed to keep sorcerers away from Gojo. We'll have to assess the threat level as we push forward." "Right behind you, Nanami-san," Ino said, tugging his ski mask into place. Beside him, Megumi's hands were already slipping into a shadow puppet stance. "Hold on." Ren's voice broke the momentum. He hadn't moved to join them, his hands still shoved deep in his uniform pockets as he stared down the empty street. Nanami paused, looking back. "Is there a problem?" "A pretty massive one," Ren said, turning to meet the Grade 1 sorcerer's gaze. "The second we cross that threshold, we lose all comms. Ijichi and the other managers are standing out here in the dark, glued to their glowing phones. If whoever set this trap has half a brain, they're gonna sever our support lines before we even know what hit us." Megumi frowned, glancing toward the dark alleys behind them. "You want us to wait?" "No, you guys go. I'll catch up," Ren replied, flashing a brief, reassuring smirk to cut the tension. "Give me 20 minutes to sweep the perimeter and force the managers indoors. Just don't exorcise all the ugly ones before I get there." Nanami considered the logic for a fraction of a second before giving a sharp nod. Very well. Secure the perimeter, then rendezvous with us inside. Do not be late. Run watched the black veil ripple as Nanami, Ino, and Megumi stepped through. The relaxed smirk dropped from his face. He turned and sprinted down the Dojinzaka alleyway, his boots making zero sound on the asphalt. He scanned the ambient cursed energy in the district. Two distinct signatures moved through the shadows near the main intersection. One signature was erratic and malicious, Haruta Shigemo. The second signature hovered a block away, feeling like a dormant, suffocating glacier. Uram. Ren checked his system. His residual cursed energy was still draining. He hadn't hit absolute zero yet. Engaging Uram right now was guaranteed suicide. A block over, Ichichi stood isolated by his black sedan, typing on his illuminated tablet. From the opposite end of the street, Haruta skipped out of an alley. He spotted Ichichi's back and accelerated. Ren crossed the street in a fraction of a second. He clamped his hand over Ichichi's mouth and yanked the manager backward into the deep shadows of a parking garage. Haruta's hand sword sliced through empty air. The blonde curse user blinked, looking around the empty street. Huh? Where'd the suit go? Haruta whined, kicking a tire. After a moment of pouting, he skipped away, following the distant, icy pull of his companion. In the darkness of the garage, Ichichi thrashed until Rin pinned him to the concrete wall by his shoulders. Quiet, Rin whispered. His eyes locked on the street until Haruta's signature faded. Waitin'. Ichichi gasped, his knees buckling slightly as the adrenaline spiked. What was that? Your executioner, Rin stated flatly, releasing his grip. They have hunting dogs sweeping the perimeter. Their goal is to slaughter every auxiliary manager in Shibuya to blind the sorcerers inside. Ren tapped the glowing screen of Ichichi's tablet. Issue a mass directive right now. Immediate evacuation. Order every manager around the perimeter to abandon their posts immediately. Relocation. Pull back and establish a new command center indoors, at least 2 miles away. Radio silence. Stay off the open streets and stick to highly populated civilian areas. But we have standing orders, Ichichi stammered. Protocol is dead, Ichichi, Ren said, his voice dropping cold. If you stay out here, you die. If the managers die, Nanami, Megumi, and others have zero outside support. Send the fallback order. Ichichi swallowed hard. His fingers flew across the tablet. Done. The retreat order is out, Ichichi breathed. Ren grabbed Ichichi by the collar and hauled him out the back exit, blurring through the dark backstreets. He put a solid mile between them and the Dojinzaka perimeter before shoving the manager through the service doors of an empty office building. Stay here. Lock it down, Ren ordered, stepping backward. I'm going after Kujisaki. Ichichi sank to the concrete, clutching his tablet and gasping for air. He didn't ask questions. He just gave a tight, rapid nod. Ren pulled the heavy steel door shut. The deadbolt engaged with a loud click. Hitting the street at a dead sprint, he cleared the blocks between the safe house and the Mark City entrance in record time. His eyes locked on the towering wall of the Veil. Without Maki to run vanguard, Kujisaki's a dead woman, he muttered, his breath pluming in the chill air. Nabito wouldn't protect her. Nita couldn't. With Maki being stuck in a Hokkaido blizzard, Run had to fill the gap. The edge of the curtain loomed. At the extreme corner of his vision, the translucent gold timer ticked down its final seconds. 0:04, 0:03. Ren didn't brace himself. He hit the barrier at a full sprint. The heavy, ink-like darkness washed over him. The ambient noise of the outside city severed instantly, replaced by the suffocating, oppressive silence of the trapped district. 0:02, 0:01. Ren's boots slammed onto the station plaza asphalt. Midnight. System alert. Cursed energy 0. Condition met. Heavenly restriction. Complete unlocked. Ren stumbled, his momentum completely breaking. He caught himself, planting a hand on the hood of an abandoned taxi. The metal crumpled like wet paper under his palm.
Ren froos.
The last, lingering spark of cursed energy inside his body had just vanished, completely hollowed out by the system. But instead of feeling empty, the world around him violently snapped into focus. The shift was completely overwhelming. He could suddenly hear the erratic, panicked heartbeats of civilians hiding inside a department store 3 blocks away. He could feel the minute shifts in air pressure and temperature density. The pavement beneath his boots no longer felt like solid ground, it felt 3 grotesque, mismatched shapes were backing a group of office workers into a corner. Their limbs were stretched at unnatural angles, their faces melted, agonizing grins.
Transfigurat humans.
One of the monsters lunged toward a crying woman. The concrete cratered beneath Ren's boots as he closed the distance in a fraction of a second. His hand snapped to his waist. Nightfall cleared its scabbard. The raw kinetic force of his swing sheared through the air, creating a localized shockwave that blew out the remaining window frames. The monster's upper half slid off its waist and hit the floor with a wet thud. The other 2 pivoted, letting out gurgling shrieks. Ren stepped into their guard. To his newly tuned perception, they were moving through wet cement. He severed the second one's head with a casual flick of his wrist, pivoted, and drove the pitch-black katana straight through the third one's chest, pinning it to a concrete pillar. The creature thrashed for a split second before going limp. Ren flicked the blood off Nightfall and sheathed it. The terrified civilians huddled on the floor hadn't even registered his movements. Before he could turn away, pale blue panels shattered into merciful release. Condition: grant swift cessation to an irreversibly transfigured human soul. Classification: ex-human/aberration.
Reward. +1 i 500 000 szkoły podstawowej.
Note: target does not contribute to standard cursed spirit eradication milestones. Achievement unlocked. The butterfly effect, minor anchor. Condition: prevented the predetermined assassination attempt of a key logistical asset, Kiyotaka Ajichi. Impact: auxiliary network preserved. Tactical blackout averted.
Reward. +5,000 szkoły podstawowej.
Note: the enemy's perimeter sweep has failed. The board shifts in Tokyo's favor. Ren dismissed the screens with a sharp swipe of his hand. He looked deeper into the station, feeling the dense malice pooling in the subterranean levels. October 31st, 2206, Dojinzaka Alleyway. The wrapped handle of the cleaver groaned as Nanami's knuckles turned white around it. His chest rose and fell in a slow, steady rhythm. Next to him, Megumi rubbed a layer of black soot off his face, his dark eyes darting across the crushed concrete and shadows of the street. They spotted the group just outside the Mark City complex. Nobara stood planted like a wall in front of Akari Nitta. The manager's face was the color of chalk, hands shaking violently, though there wasn't a single scratch on her clothes. A few steps away, Nabito Zenin rocked back on his heels, hands resting deep inside his yukata. His chin tipped up to watch the pitch-black sky as if waiting for a fireworks show. Crunch. Heavy boots ground into broken glass. The first-year girl whipped her head toward the alleyway, spreading her feet wide. She gripped her hammer until the wood groaned. A tailored suit cut a sharp line through the dim light as Nanami stepped out of the shadows. Megumi followed close behind. Seeing them, Nobara let out a breath she didn't even know she was holding. Her tense shoulders dropped instantly. Nanami. The sharp smell of liquor filled the air as drops spilled into his white mustache. He wiped his mouth with a lazy swipe of his sleeve, a sly smile wrinkling his cheeks. Sealed away, the old man mused. Well, well, what a tragedy. He let out another dry chuckle. The almighty Gojo clan is nothing but a one-man show. Without Satoru on the throne, they have no teeth. The Zenin family can finally wipe them right off the map. Nanami didn't even look at him. He didn't care about clan politics. His face remained completely blank as he turned his back on the laughing old man and locked eyes with the first-year girl. Kujisaki, Nanami said, his voice flat, you are taking Nida-san and leaving the veil. Right now. Nobara's knuckles turned white around the wooden handle of her hammer. What? No. I can fight. I'm going down there with you guys to get him out. Shoes crunched on broken concrete. Megumi stepped out of the shadows, his face pale but set. He's right, Kujisaki. She glared at him. Fushiguro, don't you start. Look at her. Megumi interrupted. He pointed a finger at the manager. Nitu stood frozen against the brick wall. Her knees were knocking together, and her breathing came in short, panicked gasps. Her face was the color of chalk. The curses waiting down in that subway just trapped the strongest guy on the planet, Megumi said softly. Nida-san can't fight. She won't last a single minute down there. He stepped closer, meeting Nobara's angry stare. We can't drag her into a fight, and we don't have the hands to protect her while fighting special grades. She needs an escort to make it out of Shibuya alive. You have to be her shield. Nobara opened her mouth, her jaw tight. She looked at the dark, smoking subway entrance, then back to the shivering manager. Slowly, she lowered her hammer. Fine, she muttered, the word sharp on her tongue. She marched over and grabbed the sleeve of the manager's black suit. Come on, Nida-san. We're leaving. Wind battered the massive glass facade of Shibuya Mark City, rattling the panes in their frames. Nanami pushed through the heavy doors, stepping onto the sprawling concourse of the Inokashira line. A transit hub built for tens of thousands of commuters sat completely, unervingly hollow. We need a direct route to the lower sublevels, Nanami said, his gaze sweeping the abandoned ticket gates. Megumi hovered near the rear, his hands resting just inches from his pockets. The ambient cursed energy in the room was suffocating, like trying to breathe in damp wool. Don't drop your guard, Megumi murmured, his shadow stretching unnaturally long across the floorboards. The air in here is too thick. Nobito merely clicked his tongue, his wooden sandals clacking lazily against the tile as he took a relaxed step forward. Then they saw it. It was hovering near a central concrete pillar, a bloated crimson monstrosity drifting a few feet off the ground. It looked absurd, like a massive gelatinous octopus swaddled in a burial shroud. A curse. Megumi breathed, his fingers twitching. Hold your positions, Nanami ordered, his hands slipping to the wrapped handle of his cleaver. Too slow. Megumi didn't even see him bend his knees. 1 second the old man was standing beside them, and the next he was just gone. The sharp clack of his wooden sandal echoed off the tile 20 feet away. He was already standing directly in front of the curse, his palm slapping against its bulbous head. The creature froze. A flat, glowing, two-dimensional frame locked around it, suspending the curse midair like a paused video. Nobito didn't hesitate. He pivoted, driving a brutal right hook directly through the frozen image. The frame shattered like tempered glass. The stored kinetic force unleashed all at once, launching the massive red curse backward like a mortar shell. It slammed into a load-bearing pillar with enough force to spiderweb the concrete. Is that all? Nobito scoffed, dusting off his yukata sleeve. This is the trash they leave to guard the upper levels? From the base of the fractured pillar came a wet, tearing sound. The bloated curse dragged itself from the rubble. Its red flesh undulated, rippling and bubbling violently. It started to heave. A sickening cascade of bleached white bones, rib cages, and human skulls poured from its mouth, clattering loudly across the pristine station tiles. The pile just kept growing. The curse raised its head, its voice ripping through the station in a high, ear-splitting shriek. Shibuya streets, 10:22 p.m. Stay close to the walls. Nobara seized Nido's sleeve, hauling the manager behind a row of overturned vending machines. The crossing lay entirely vacant. A crushed stroller rested against a bent lamppost. Hundreds of dropped phones lit up the dark asphalt, vibrating endlessly with unanswered calls. Every step they took ground shattered storefront glass into the pavement. Kujisaki-san, wait! Nida braced both palms against the brick wall, doubling over. A sharp, ragged wheeze rattled in her chest. Her pencil skirt was torn at the hem, and she shifted her weight off a cracked heel, her legs visibly shaking. The barrier edge, 3 blocks north. Alleyways. We can slip out. Nobara didn't look back. Her thumb traced the rough wood of her hammer. Then save your breath and keep moving. A few yards down a narrow side street, Nobara stopped dead. She threw her left arm back, the back of her wrist hitting Nido's chest to halt her. A single broken street lamp buzzed overhead, throwing jagged, twitching shadows across the pavement. Quiet, Nobara whispered. Nito instantly clamped both hands over her mouth, swallowing a gasp. Nobara raised her hammer, shifting her weight onto the balls of her feet. The hairs on the back of her neck prickled against her high collar. The ambient noise of the city had completely flatlined.
No sirens.
No distant screams. Just a heavy, suffocating stillness. Click, clack, click. Leather soles slapped rhythmically against the pavement. Skipping, a man bounced into the pool of flickering orange light. His lips were stretched violently back, exposing his teeth in a smile that didn't reach his wide, unblinking eyes. His blonde ponytail swung side to side with his weightless, erratic steps. In his right hand, he casually twirled a blade. The hilt wasn't wrapped in leather. It was molded into the pale, bruised shape of a severed human hand. He pushed his lower lip out, blowing a loose strand of hair out of his face. His gaze slid right past Nobara, locking directly onto the terrified woman cowering behind her. Aha! His laugh was high and sharp, scraping against the brick walls. Someone snatched the other suit guy right out from under me. But look, I found a shiny new manager instead. He tilted his head until the joints in his neck popped. Aren't you guys supposed to be hiding? Nobara stepped sideways, putting her body completely between the man and Nita. She planted her boots shoulder-width apart and leveled the head of her hammer straight at his chest. Nita-san, Nobara said, her voice dropping into a dead, flat calm. When I say run, you run. A harsh autumn wind ripped across the gravel roof, snapping the heavy dark fabric of Ren's uniform jacket. He sat perched on the concrete ledge, his boots swinging out over the 300-foot drop. The sirens and wet, echoing crunches from the streets below were swallowed by the altitude, leaving nothing up here but the rushing wind. In the dead space hanging over the drop, a translucent blue interface flickered into existence. The sterile light washed across his face, reflecting in his dark eyes as he scanned the scrolling text. Achievement unlocked. Mass purge. Aberrations. Condition. Eradicate 50+ irreversibly transfigured humans in a single combat zone. Reward. Plus 10,000 system points. Achievement unlocked. Guardian of the Weak. Condition. Secure the direct survival of 100+ non-sorcerer civilians. Reward. Plus 5,000 system points. System balance update. Current balance. 66,500 SP. Run swiped his hand through the air. The blue panels shattered into dust and faded into the dark sky. He let out a slow breath, watching the white mist plume in the chill air. 10,000 for the monsters, 5,000 for the people. he muttered to himself. Points definitely helped. Closing his eyes, taking in a long, freezing breath of the autumn air. When he opened them again, the clarity of his complete heavenly restriction was still there, but the overwhelming sensory overload had finally dialed back. He slowly stretched his arms above his head, the joints popping in a satisfying sequence before rolling his shoulders. The pitch-black fabric of his jujitsu high uniform pulled tight against his newly optimized musculature. I think I'm finally getting used to this new strength, he muttered to himself, flexing his hands and testing his grip. The air resistance against his fingers felt as tangible as water. He could calculate the exact density of the concrete beneath his boots without even trying. And all the other shit that comes with it. He dropped his arms, his posture shifting into a relaxed readiness. All right, Ren breathed out, stepping up to the edge. Let's get going now. He didn't brace for the fall. He just stepped off the ledge and let gravity take him. The wind roared past his ears as he plummeted down the side of the towering Shibuya office building. Halfway down the massive drop, he twisted his body in midair, spotting a rusted fire escape jutting out from the adjacent brick wall. He reached out. The steel shrieked and bent completely out of shape under the sheer kinetic force, but it successfully arrested his momentum in a fraction of a second. Run swung his body weight forward, released the rail, and dropped the remaining 3 stories. He landed in the narrow alleyway below with a heavy, muffled thud, the asphalt instantly spiderwebbing beneath his boots. Before the dust could even settle around his ankles, Run froze. Narrowing his eyes, his gaze piercing through the gloom of the alley toward the flickering streetlights of the dark streets ahead. Kujisaki? He muttered. Nobara's chest heaved. Blood dripped from a cut above her eye, stinging as it ran down her cheek. She gripped her hammer, legs planted wide. Behind her, Nitu lay crumpled against a brick wall, clutching her side. Dark red soaked through the manager's white shirt, dripping onto the asphalt. Nita was gasping, tears streaming down her face as she struggled to stay conscious. Ah! Is the manager crying? Haruta giggled. He skipped in a slow, mocking circle around them, spinning his hand sword. I barely even cut her. You guys are so fragile. It's no fun at all. Nobara gritted her teeth. This guy wasn't a powerhouse, but he was impossible to hit. Every time she swung, he slipped away like water, dodging with an unnatural kind of luck. Now, with Nita bleeding out, Nobara couldn't step forward to attack. She was completely pinned down, playing a human shield. My turn, Haruta cheered. He kicked off the ground and launched himself straight at Nita, manic grin wide. Nobara braced herself, ready to take the blade. She locked her legs and waited for the pain. It never came. Rin didn't feel himself run. It was like stepping through an open door. 1 second, he was at the end of the street. The next, the air simply parted around him. He materialized directly behind the leaping curse user, no wind-up, no crash. Just a silent, instant shift. The blonde man was still midair, grin stretching across his face. Run raised his hand and clamped his fingers around the thick ponytail. He stopped moving entirely. The grip anchored him mid-leap, killing his momentum in a fraction of a second. The sudden halt jerked him backward, boots slapping the pavement. The hand sword froze inches from Nobara's face. The giggling cut off. The street went dead quiet. The curse user stood frozen, eyes wide. He tried to turn his head, but the grip on his hair was a vice. His brain failed to process it. Nobody had been there a second ago. Nobara blinked. She lowered her hammer just a fraction, staring past him at the familiar uniform. Her mouth parted. Ren didn't look at her. He stared at the back of the man's head, expression flat. You're really loud, he said. The hair bunched in his fist. With a casual heave, he swung his arm up and threw the man into the air. The asphalt instantly cratered under Ren's boots from the violent shift in leverage. A sharp crack of displaced air whipped through the alley as the man was ripped from the ground. The curse user's manic grin contorted into wide, breathless panic. He didn't even have the breath to scream. The sheer G-force pinned his voice to the back of his throat as his limbs flailed wildly against the ascent. The man launched upward, a flailing blur clearing the 4-story roofline across the street before the ink-black curtain swallowed him entirely. The pale hand sword plummeted a second later, cracking against the asphalt and skidding into the gutter. Ren lowered his arm. A slow, even plume of white breath curled from his lips into the chill air. He stepped forward, his boots crunching steadily over the pavement. A few paces away, Nobara remained locked in her wide stance. Her knuckles stretched bone-white around her hammer's grip. Her chin pointed straight up, her eyes wide and fixed on the empty patch of dark sky above the streetlights. Ren stopped in front of her. He wrapped his hand over the iron head of her mallet and pushed it down. Her rigid shoulders sank with the motion, dragging her gaze back to eye level. "You okay?" he asked. She blinked. Her shoulders dropped. A sharp, ragged breath ripped through her teeth. "Yeah, I'm fine." She snapped her head around, her eyes going wide. But Nita, Ren was already kneeling over the manager. Nita sat slumped against the brick, taking fast, shallow hitches of air. Both hands clamped her side. Dark blood welled thick between her fingers, soaking the white fabric of her blouse. Ren pushed her hands aside. The slice was clean, a lateral line across her ribs. Not lethal right now, but a heavy bleeder. He grabbed the hem of his black undershirt and ripped a long strip clean off. "Keep pressure on it when you walk," he said. He stood, shrugging his uniform jacket back into place. "It'll hold until you clear the curtain." He looked at Nobara. "Can you get her out?" Nobara straightened, tightening her grip on her hammer. "Obviously. Who do you think you're talking to?" The corner of his mouth twitched. He took a single step. The space between them simply vanished. His thumb brushed the side of her temple, smearing a thin streak of blood away from a cut over her eyebrow. Nobara froze. "Good." His voice dropped. "If you die out here, I'm going to be annoyed about that coffee I owe you." A slow smirk pulled at his mouth. "Besides, it'd be a damn shame to lose my second favorite girl at Jujitsu High." Heat flooded Nobara's face. She swatted his hand away, driving an accusing finger hard against his sternum. "Second, you absolute. I hope a special grade swallows you whole." Rain left. A quiet, genuine sound that scraped against the dead silence of the street. He turned and headed for the station entrance, his boots crushing the shattered glass. "See you on the other side, Kujisaki," he said, keeping his back to her. Nobara stood there, her cheeks burning. She slapped both palms hard against her own face, shook her head once, and grabbed Nita by the uninjured arm. "Come on, Nita-san," she muttered, hauling the manager upright and steering her north. "Let's go before I do something I regret." Behind them, the pitch-black maw of the station swallowed him. Run left the alley, keeping his eyes locked on the Mark City station. Halfway across the street, he froze. His ears popped. The crisp autumn wind vanished, replaced in a heartbeat by air so thick and damp it clung to his skin like a wet towel. The scattered trash on the pavement stopped skittering, dropping dead to the concrete. He looked up. Through the intact glass of the station's upper concourse, nothing seemed physically broken. Yet the air around it felt impossibly heavy. It was a suffocating pressure, as if an invisible, crushing weight had been dropped over that specific section of the building. "Domain expansion," he muttered. Run broke into a sprint, taking the station stairs 2 at a time. The closer he got, the clearer the devastation became. The heavy entrance doors were already blown out. He stepped through the twisted frames, his boots crunching loudly over a carpet of shattered glass. Inside, the concourse was a graveyard of pulverized concrete and warped metal, and in the dead center of the ruin sat the source of the pressure, a massive, pitch-black sphere floating just above the floor. He didn't hesitate. Ren held out his left hand, triggering his inventory. A faint, translucent grid flickered to life in the dim light. He reached into the empty space, his fingers wrapping solid around the hilt of his katana. Stepping up to the smooth, ink-like surface of the barrier, he braced his stance. He pulled the sword back and drove the point straight into the shell. The dome shrieked. Purple lightning lashed out, crackling violently as the blade bit deep. With a harsh twist of his wrists, Ren dragged the steel downward, carving a jagged tear into the domain. Blinding tropical sunlight flooded the dark station, followed instantly by the roar of crashing ocean waves. Ren tightened his grip, shifting his weight to step inside. Then the hairs on his neck stood straight up. There was no spike of cursed energy, no sound of approaching footsteps, just the suffocating, primal certainty that a predator was standing directly behind him. He tried to swing the sword around, but he wasn't fast enough. A fist slammed between his shoulder blades like a wrecking ball, the con tumbling end over end. He finally jammed his boots and his free hand deep into the sand, dragging himself to a painful halt. "Damn it!" he coughed, spitting out a mix of seawater and sand. He forced his head up. Above him, the jagged crack in the sky was already sealing itself shut. But a split second before the dark slit vanished, a figure stepped through. The man landed softly on the shifting water. A tight white shirt clung to his heavily muscled frame, his dark baggy pants rippling in the artificial sea breeze. A jagged scar marked the corner of his mouth. Toji Fushiguro. Ijichi leaned his weight against the hood of his parked sedan, clinging to the deep shadows of the evacuated street exactly as Ren had ordered. The tablet in his hands vibrated violently. Its harsh red glare painted his pale, sweating face with blinking signal lost warnings. Distant sirens wailed, but the street itself was dead quiet. A bead of sweat stung his eye. He hastily scrubbed his forehead with a trembling sleeve. Then, a sonic boom shattered the silence. A gale-force shockwave ripped down the asphalt. Trash cans launched into the air. A steel stop sign shrieked as it was torn completely off its hinges. Ijichi dove behind the car, throwing his arms over his head as a spray of loose gravel machine-gunned against the metal doors. The ground violently bucked beneath his shoes. A sickening crunch of pulverized street echoed just inches from the front bumper. Ijichi's tablet slipped from his numb fingers, the screen splintering against the pavement. A thick cloud of dust and debris choked the air. Slowly, the grit began to settle. A tall silhouette cut through the haze. Maki Zenin stood dead center in a crater of shattered asphalt. Frost and highway soot stained the frayed edges of her jacket, her dark green hair whipping wildly in the residual wind. She stepped out of the smoking crater. The heavy wood of her naginata tapped sharply against the broken asphalt. Her breath plumed in the cold air. Her eyes locked onto the manager hiding behind the car. "Ijichi," Maki said. Her voice was dangerously calm, carrying a sharp edge that cut right through the ringing in his ears. "Tell me exactly what I'm looking at. Fast." Ijichi scrambled to his feet, dusting off his knees. He opened his mouth, pointing a trembling finger toward the massive black curtain towering over Shibuya. "Maki-san, it's the station." A sharp, buzzing ringtone cut him off. Ijichi flinched. He patted his suit jacket, quickly pulling out his cell phone. The screen glowed in the dark street, showing a caller ID. "It's Nita," he gasped, his eyes widening. "She must have crossed the veil." Maki closed the distance in 2 long strides. She snatched the phone from his hand and tapped the speaker button, holding it flat between them. "Report," Maki ordered. Static crackled through the speaker. When Akari Nita spoke, her voice was clipped, steady, and strictly professional. "This is Nita," she reported. "I am safely outside the barrier. Medical assistance is required at my coordinates, but that is secondary. I need to relay critical intel to command." "We are listening, Nita-san," Ijichi said, leaning closer. "What is the situation inside?" "The worst-case scenario," Nita stated. "Satoru Gojo is sealed." Ijichi's knees buckled. He grabbed the side mirror of the sedan to keep from collapsing, his skin turning the color of wet ash. Maki stared at the glowing screen. The only sound in the street was the wind whipping past the parked cars. A thick vein pulsed at the edge of her jaw. She slowly tightened her grip on her naginata. The solid oak shaft let out a sharp, cracking groan under the crushing pressure of her bare hands. "Confirmed?" Maki asked, her voice dropping an octave. "Confirmed," Nita replied without hesitation. "The enemy deployed a special grade cursed object. Gojo-san is trapped, and the curses have locked down the underground levels. A curse user are hunting auxiliary managers to cut our comms. I took a blade to my side, but Kujisaki-san secured the area and escorted me to the perimeter." "Where is Nobara now?" "She returned to the combat zone," Nita answered. "She went back inside the veil to act as vanguard for Nanami-san and Fushiguro-kun. They are pushing down to the subway lines to locate the seal." "Understood," Maki said. She tossed the phone back to Ijichi. "Call Shoko. Get Nita patched up." Ijichi fumbled the catch, hugging the phone to his chest. "Maki-san, where are you going?" Maki rolled her shoulders. She turned her back to him, her boots grinding over the pulverized street as she marched straight toward the towering black dome. Inside the domain expansion, hovering above the white sand, Dagon stared at the sky where his domain had just torn open and snapped shut. His multiple eyes darted between the teenager on the beach and the tall, scarred man balancing effortlessly on the ocean's surface. Dagon strained to read their cursed energy, but found absolutely nothing. To his domain, neither registered as living creatures. They felt like inert rocks, like empty space. A low rumble of frustration vibrated in the curse's chest. A few yards away, blood soaked into the pristine sand. Megumi dropped to one knee, gasping for air. Black, liquid shadows swirled wildly around his boots, desperately fighting back the bright beach. His shaking hands remained locked in a tight shadow puppet madra. Bleeding from his chin, he pushed every last drop of his energy into keeping his incomplete domain open. The only thing stopping Dagon's endless swarm of flesh-eating fish from stripping them to the bone. Acting as a shield, Nanami stood directly in front of him. His tailored suit was shredded, and his chest heaved as he maintained a white-knuckled grip on his wrapped cleaver. Beside them stood Naobito, his right arm hanging limp and bleeding heavily. The drunken glaze had completely vanished from the old man's eyes. Ignoring the teenager entirely, his wide, unblinking stare locked onto the muscular man with the scarred lip. Naobito staggered forward. "Toji!" He rasped over the roar of the crashing waves. Down on the shoreline, Rin spat a mouthful of wet sand and blood. He wiped his mouth, glaring at the man standing on the water. "Cheap shot." Rin wiped his mouth, glaring who attacks from behind. Toji didn't so much as blink. His pitch-black eyes were completely hollow, an abyss devoid of reason or sanity. The resurrected sorcerer-killer stood perfectly balanced on the rolling ocean. Run let out a heavy sigh, rolling his shoulders to shake off the impact. "Right? The strong, silent zombie type. Cool. Great talk." Ren adjusted his grip on the black hilt of his katana. He stood entirely still, his mind racing. He had two massive problems. In front of him was Toji Fushiguro, a ghost operating on pure, soulless instinct. Above him floated Dagon, a special grade disaster curse worth a massive payout of system points. If he turned his back on Toji, it was a death sentence. But if he didn't secure the kill on Dagon, he wouldn't get the points he desperately needed. A few yards away, blood soaked into the pristine sand. Megumi was on one knee, violently bleeding as he pushed every last drop of his energy into keeping his incomplete domain open to suppress Dagon's guaranteed hit effect. High above the white sand, Dagon let out a wet, furious gargle. Dagon gurgled, his multiple eyes narrowing in disgust. "You're just meat. Empty, useless meat." Abandoning his frustration, Dagon raised his webbed hands and manually directed the water to attack. The ocean frothed, and dozens of massive, flesh-eating fish burst from the waves, hurtling toward the shoreline like torpedoes. The swarming Shikigami slammed down toward the beach. Ren swung Nightfall in a fast, tight arc. A sharp hum cut through the air, and the incoming fish split into neat halves. Dead meat and salt water splashed over his boots. But Ren kept his eyes locked on the scarred man standing on the water. Toji was empty-handed. No cursed tool, no knife. But Ren knew exactly what a complete heavenly restriction felt like now. He could feel the terrifying strength packed into his own muscles, and Toji had the exact same power. If Ren turned his back to fight the floating curse, he was giving an equal opponent a free shot at his blind spot. A bare fist backed by that much force could do quite a lot of damage. "Nanami-san, old man," Ren called out, his eyes never leaving Toji. "I need a favor." Nanami wiped blood from his chin and tightened his grip on his cleaver. "This is a terrible time for jokes, Ren. Keep the zombie busy for 15 seconds, Ren said. He pointed his free hand up at Dagon. "I'll chop the squid into calamari, but someone needs to watch my back." Nanami stared at him, his disbelief obvious behind his cracked goggles. "That is a special grade curse. You cannot simply—" 15 seconds. Ren cut him off, his voice flat. Nanami ground his teeth. He glanced at Megumi, who shook violently as dark shadows leaked from his hands. Ren looked at Nabito. The old Zenin clan head looked awful. He was pale, sweating, and clutching the bleeding stump of his arm. But his wide, unblinking eyes were glued entirely to Toji. Nabito knew exactly who that man was. His body was stiff with pure survival instinct. "Hey, old man," Ren said loudly. "Can you stall him or not?" Nabito flinched. He dragged his gaze from Toji to Ren. He spat a mouthful of blood onto the white sand and let out a harsh laugh. 15 seconds against Toji Fushiguro, Nabito rasped. He forced himself to stand straight, shifting his weight to his good side. "You ask for miracles, boy. Do it fast." "Count on it," Ren said. High up, Dagon shrieked. The water bubbled. Another massive wave of fish shot out of the ocean, aiming right for the beach. At the exact same second, Toji kicked off the water. The ocean exploded under his feet. He shot toward the shore like a missile, aiming straight for Ren. "Go!" Nanami yelled. Nanami and Nabito surged forward. They threw themselves right into Toji's path. Nanami swung his cleaver, forcing the scarred man to dodge, while Nabito used his speed technique to try and box Toji in. Ren didn't stick around to watch. He ignored the fight behind him completely. He kicked off the sand. The white beach cratered beneath his boots. Dagon sneered, raising his webbed hands. To the disaster curse, Ren was just an empty, weak target with no cursed energy. Dagon summoned a wall of water, ready to crush the human. He never got the chance. Ren's speed was completely beyond Dagon's perception. In Ren's right hand, Nightfall began to vibrate. The katana had just sliced through dozens of Dagon's flesh-eating fish. The blade's special trait activated, instantly converting the stolen cursed energy from the Shikigami into pure positive energy. The pitch-black steel rapidly shifted, glowing with a blinding, bright white light. Ren closed the distance in a fraction of a second, appearing right in front of Dagon's face. He pulled Nightfall back, pointing the glowing white tip directly at the curse's chest. Dagon panicked. He hastily crossed his thick arms to block the incoming stab. But Ren didn't stab him. Ren dropped his sword arm, twisted his hips, and threw a brutal left hook. His bare fist slammed directly into Dagon's face. The raw, terrifying force of the complete heavenly restriction crushed Dagon's jaw instantly. The special grade curse folded in half. Dagon plummeted out of the sky like a dropped boulder, slamming into the white beach. The impact blasted sand 50 feet into the air. Ren hovered at the peak of his jump for a split second. He flipped the glowing white katana in his hand, aiming the point downward. With a sharp exhale, he threw Nightfall like a javelin. The sword cut a white streak through the air and drove straight into Dagon's chest, pinning the curse to the bottom of the crater. Dagon's multiple eyes bulged. He opened his ruined mouth to scream, but no sound came out. Because curses are made entirely of negative energy, the positive charge acted like a lethal poison, vaporizing him from the inside out. A blinding flash of white light erupted from the sand. There was no fire or shockwave. Dagon simply exploded into a massive cloud of purple ash. On the beach, Megumi dropped to both knees. The dark shadow puppets slipped from his bloody, trembling fingers. He stared at the giant crater of ash, his jaw completely slack. A special great curse had just been annihilated in exactly 3 seconds. He looked up at Ren, his exhausted mind completely failing to process what he just watched. A few yards away, Nanami and Nabito barely dodged a sweeping kick from Toji. They both snapped their heads toward the massive explosion of positive energy. Even Nabito forgot to breathe, his eyes wide in absolute shock. Without Dagon alive to sustain it, the sunny beach and crashing waves flickered like a broken television screen. The sky cracked. The ocean tore apart like wet paper. The entire domain expansion shattered into millions of black, glassy fragments that instantly melted into the air. The blinding sunlight vanished. The harsh, flickering fluorescent lights of the underground station snapped back into reality. The smell of ocean salt was replaced by the dry, metallic scent of train tracks and concrete dust. Ren landed smoothly on the tiled floor of the Shibuya subway station. He walked forward, pulling Nightfall out of the small pile of ash left behind, and flicked his wrist to clean the blade. He looked over his shoulder. Nanami, Nabito, and Megumi were staring at him in stunned silence. Then, right across the station floor, Toji Fushiguro slowly turned his head. His soulless, pitch-black eyes locked entirely onto Ren. Before either of them could make a move, the space right in front of Ren's face violently rippled. A blinding flash of gold shattered the gloom of the subway station. He just stared at the small pile of purple ash settling on the cracked tiles, and then at the teenager who was casually flicking his black katana clean. Aura farming. The phrase echoed in the forefront of Nanami's mind with the piercing, agonizing clarity of an impending migraine. Behind his cracked goggles, Nanami closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. The metallic stench of the subway tracks faded, instantly replaced by the damp, stale air of a concrete basement months ago. He could perfectly hear Satoru Gojo's utterly obnoxious, sing-song whisper. He's just acting like a clumsy newbie on purpose. He wants to look cool. He's just waiting for the perfect, dramatic moment where everyone is cornered and all hope is lost, just so he can suddenly reveal his true strength. Man, what a drag! The golden text blazed in Ren's eyes. He never reached the first letter. A crack. Not a sound. More like reality tearing along a seam. And where the scarred man had been standing, purple ash curled into nothing. Then Toji was in his face. Ren's wrists came up on pure instinct. Nightfall's blade caught the fist flat, and the sound wasn't a clang. It was a boom, a cannon going off in the enclosed station. The shockwave hit like a wall. Ren's boots screamed across tile, 2 long trenches carving through concrete before his back heel found the ground. He held. Get back! Not a look over his shoulder. Not even a blink. Toji dropped his weight and swept low, legs swinging at Ren's knees with enough force to fold them backward. Ren left the ground by an inch, clearing it, twisted in the air, and drove his boot at Toji's jaw. A forearm came up. The impact shuddered through the nearest support pillar. Then fingers closed around his ankle. Steel. No give. The world spun. Toji twisted and threw, and Ren was airborne, hurtling toward the exit in one brutal spinning arc. He tucked his chin, braced. He hit the subway doors and punched straight through. Glass exploded around him in a glittering curtain. The stairs came up fast, fingers biting into cement, body curling through a backward roll on pure muscle memory, and then he was standing upright on cold Shibuya pavement. Silent street. Overhead, that black veil swallowed everything. The remaining glass downstairs gave way. Toji came up the stairwell in a single leap and cracked the asphalt when he landed. Ren studied him across the broken street. Toji's chest moved. He couldn't see them. He was a seasoned grade 1 sorcerer. He'd spent years learning to read the fastest, most lethal curses alive. The residual trails, the buildups, the tells. There was nothing here. No cursed energy.
No signatures.
The kid's face was a mess of blood and grit, but the question in his eyes was the same one rattling around Nanami's skull. What the hell are we even watching? Neither had an answer. Stop gawking. Nabito pushed forward. The clan head was a ruin, breathing in ragged pulls, blood still sheeting from the stump where his right arm ended. But his eyes were sharp and completely without sentiment as he watched the asphalt tear itself apart. The boy holds that ghost, he grunted, spitting blood onto the cracked tiles. We step into that crossfire, we die. Instantly. We are a burden to him here. Nanami's jaw tightened. He knew the old man was right. Gojo is still sealed, Nabito continued, already turning his back on the carnage. Leave the ghost to the kid. Let's move. Nanami took one last look, the blur of 2 impossible bodies hitting absolute limits, and let out a long breath. The migraine was already forming behind his eyes. Understood, he said and turned away. Megumi fell in close behind him, wiping blood from his chin. Nabito took the lead, pace unsettlingly steady for a man hemorrhaging through a severed arm. They didn't make it 3 steps. The air didn't warm up. It became an oven. Instantly, completely, and the cracked concrete beneath Nanami's shoes hissed like wet iron on a fire. Megumi choked. Nanami stopped breathing for a second, lungs scorched by a single sharp inhale. Through the settling dust, a new shape stood motionless over the scatter of purple ash where rain had vaporized the water curse. Short, black clothes, a spotted yellow shawl, a white scarf. Jogo didn't look at them. His single massive eye was fixed on what remained of his comrade. Nanami felt a cold sweat break out across his neck, entirely ignoring the suffocating temperature of the room. The cursed energy rolling off this newcomer was sickening. It was dense, heavy, and undeniably lethal. This is wrong, Nanami thought, his grip tightening on his weapon until his knuckles turned white. The water curse had vast energy, yes, but it was raw, unfocused. This is on a completely different level. Next to him, Megumi's hands trembled. He forced them up anyway, locking his fingers together to form a shadow puppet. His instincts screamed at him to run. Dagon was a joke compared to this, Megumi realized, his breathing shallow and panicked. Just standing near him feels like my skin is catching fire. Nabito didn't say a word. Without a single command, all three battered sorcerers dropped into defensive stances. Jogo finally lifted his head. He didn't yell. He didn't rush them. He just looked at the three humans with a quiet, burning hatred that made the air itself ripple and distort. "Dagon," the curse muttered, his voice sounding like grinding rocks. Nanami exhaled a shaky breath, raising his blade to chest height. There was no walking away from this.
Reindokt.
A spinning heel sheared the air where his ear had just been, the wind pressure stinging his cheek like a whip. Bone met bone, the collision shattering the asphalt beneath their boots. They broke apart only to violently clash again. Run thrust at a blind spot, but Toji's shoulder was already rolling to deflect it. An instant later, a strike aimed for Ren's temple missed by a fraction of an inch, his muscle memory folding his body backward just in time to save his skull. Then, the concrete under their feet began to bake. Even up on the street, Ren tasted it. Dry sulfur and burning dust rolling up from the pitch-black subway entrance. A blistering, suffocating heat washed over the pavement, carrying a heavy, sickly pressure that made the air itself vibrate. Ren's eyes darted toward the stairs. Toji didn't flinch at the sudden disturbance. His blank eyes only tracked the momentary flicker of Ren's gaze. A fist slammed into Ren's floating ribs. The impact emptied his lungs instantly and launched him backward. He skidded across the road, heels gouging two long, smoking trenches into the pavement before he finally ground to a halt. Run spat a mouthful of copper onto the asphalt. The blistering heat radiating from the subway stairs was impossible to ignore. "Damn it!" he hissed, his grip white-knuckling the hilt of his katana. This walking volcano always picks the absolute worst time to make an entrance. He glared at Toji, who was already resetting his stance. Ren's mind scrambled for a way out. Nanami, Megumi, and Nobito were running on fumes. Against Jogo, they wouldn't last 5 seconds. Ren had to get down there, but the dead assassin blocking his path wasn't going to just let him walk away. Down in the station, the air was thick enough to choke on. Megumi couldn't even blink. The ambient heat was literally drying out his eyes. Jogo didn't step forward. The curse simply vanished. Megumi's breath hitched. He spun around, his shadows warping across the tiles, but he was far too slow. Jogo was already behind them. The curse raised a single, blackened hand and casually rested his fingers against Nanami's shoulder. It wasn't a blast of fire or a surge of cursed energy. It was pure, unadulterated kinetic force. A dark blur tore through the heavy air, moving so fast the heat haze snapped out of its way. Just a millisecond before Jogo could ignite his flames, a heavy boot planted squarely into the side of the curse's head. The impact sounded like a train derailing. Jogo was ripped away from Nanami. The disaster curse went flying across the platform, smashing violently through a row of metal turnstiles before slamming into a thick concrete pillar. The wall cratered inward, burying Jogo under a massive shower of debris. Megumi stumbled back, throwing an arm up to shield his face from the flying dust. Nanami dropped to one knee, coughing violently as he quickly patted out the burning embers on his shoulder. Through the settling cloud of crushed rock, the slow, deliberate click of heavy boots echoed across the broken tiles. Megumi squinted. A figure stepped out of the shadows and into the flickering orange light. It was Maki. Her dark uniform was dusted with concrete. Her grip locked around the shaft of her polearm. Her cold, furious gaze was fixed on the collapsed pillar across the room. Her knuckles popped as she squeezed her weapon. The jagged, permanent burn scars beneath her collar seemed to pull tight. The last time she stood in front of this specific curse, he had nearly burned her and Ren alive. Maki exhaled a sharp, irritated breath, the heavy blade of her polearm scraping against the broken tile. Maki stopped, and a slow, dark smile spread across her face. Well, Maki said, resting her weapon on her shoulder. Look who it is. It must be fate that I found you here.
And that concludes this episode. If you enjoyed it, I'd seriously love it if you guys could leave a like on the video, as it genuinely helps out so much, and it keeps me going. Plus, it takes only 1 second. That said, have a wonderful day. See you in the next one.